Hello, welcome. A lot of people put this on when they're trying to fall asleep, and I just want you to know there are no ADS because this channel isn't monetized. So if you want to support me, please subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight. I'm going to start in a place that still feels normal when I describe it, which is weird, because the memory of it doesn't behave like a normal memory anymore. It's like my mind tries to sand down the edges so I can carry it around without cutting myself. A few years ago, I worked nights at a small hotel off a highway. Not a big chain, one of those places that tries really hard to look modern in the lobby, but the hallways still smell like old carpet and cleaning solution. Night shift was quiet in a way that felt padded, like the building was wrapped in thick fabric. You'd hear the vending machine hum, the ice machine dump cubes once in a while, and then long stretches of nothing. The job was basically check people in late, print receipts, answer the phone, do a security walk every hour, and keep an eye on the cameras. I liked it. I liked the stillness. I liked how the world seemed to forget about you when you were awake at the wrong time. The first time I noticed something off, it wasn't dramatic. It was paperwork. We had these little incident forms we almost never used. The manager kept them in a drawer under the front desk, next to extra key cards and a stapler that always jammed. One night, during that dead hour around 2:40 a.m., I opened the drawer to grab tape and saw an incident form on top of the stack. It had already been filled out, not completely, just the top part, in neat block letters, like someone had started it and then stopped. Date, time, my name. My name wasn't uncommon, but it isn't exactly the kind of name you accidentally write when you mean something else. And the time written on it was 2:17 a.m. I checked the clock above the monitor. It was 2:43. I remember staring at that form like it was an object I'd found in a stranger's house. It felt personal in the wrong way. I asked the other night guy, Ralph, about it when he came in at the end of my shift. He was older, always smelled like cigarettes, even though he swore he'd quit. He looked at the form, squinted, and said, "Probably from last week. You leave stuff around." I told him I hadn't filled it out. I hadn't even touched that stack in months. Ralph shrugged like I'd told him the vending machine ate my dollar. "Then toss it." So I did. I threw it in the trash under the desk, and I remember pushing it down with my hand so it wouldn't sit on top like a little accusation. Then I washed my hands in the bathroom because I suddenly felt like I'd handled something dirty. That should have been it. But the next night, around the same time, I opened the drawer again and there was another incident form, fresh, same neat block letters, date, time, my name. This one had an extra line filled in, guest complaint. No room number, no description, just those two words, sitting there like a headline without a story. The cameras didn't show anyone behind the desk. I rewound the footage. One of the few perks of the job was you could scrub through time like it was a video game. The lobby was empty. The front doors didn't open. No one walked past. And yet the form existed. That's the kind of thing that doesn't make you scream or run. It makes you start checking your own habits. It makes you wonder if you're more tired than you think. If you've been doing things on autopilot and forgetting. So I made a little test for myself. It sounds stupid, but I was trying to be logical. I took a pen from the cup on the desk, one that had a chewed cap, so I'd recognize it, and I put it in my pocket. Then I opened the incident form drawer, took the top form, and tore the corner off. Just a small triangle. I folded it and put it in my wallet. A marker. Proof. Something only I would do. I locked the drawer. Then I went back to my routine. Answered a call from a guy asking if we had a pool. We didn't. Watched a trucker come in and buy 2 candy bars. Printed the morning reports. At 2:30 a.m., I opened the drawer. There was an incident form on top. It had my name written on it. And the pen in the cup on the desk, the one with the chewed cap, was back in the cup. I remember looking down at my pocket. It was empty. My stomach didn't drop like in movies. It tightened. It got dense, like my body was trying to turn itself into a knot. I pulled out my wallet with shaking fingers and opened it, because I needed to know if the corner I tore off was still there. It was. I ran my thumb over it. The paper felt dry and ordinary. It didn't solve anything. It just confirmed that reality was still reality, and something in it was moving around without my permission. The next day I didn't tell Ralph. I didn't tell my manager. I told myself I'd keep my mouth shut until I had something that didn't sound insane. That night, I brought a small notepad from home. I wrote a sentence across the first page in my own messy handwriting. If you're reading this, do not go into the laundry room. Then I signed it. Big. Heavy. I pressed hard enough to leave an imprint on the next page. I put the notepad in the same drawer as the incident forms, right under the stack. I wanted it hidden, but not so hidden I'd forget where it was. Around 3 a.m., I opened the drawer and pulled the notepad out. The page was gone. Not torn out messily, not ripped, cleanly removed, like someone had used a blade. The rest of the pages were there. My signature wasn't. The imprint on the next page wasn't. It was as if that page never existed. I sat down on the rolling chair behind the desk and just breathed through my nose for a minute. I could feel my own heartbeat in my fingers. The lobby was silent. The kind of silence that makes you realize your hearing is still working, because you can hear blood in your ears. I forced myself to stand up and do the thing the note warned me not to do. The laundry room was in the back, past a door marked "Employees Only," down a hallway that always felt a little too dim. The lights were on motion sensors, so they would flicker awake as you walked, like the building was reluctantly acknowledging you. The laundry room door was heavy. It had a keypad lock, but it was always set to a simple code, because staff came and went. I punched it in. Inside, the air was warm and smelled like detergent and damp fabric. The machines lined one wall, big industrial washers and dryers that rumbled even when they were empty because something about them always vibrated. There was a folding table in the middle, and on the table, neatly arranged, was a stack of incident forms. Not blank ones, filled ones, all with my name. Different dates, different times, different handwriting styles like a collection. Some said things like guest complaint or noise reported or lost key. Normal stuff. The kind of stuff that happens in a hotel, but none of them had room numbers. And at the bottom of each, in a space where you'd usually write a resolution, there was always the same line. Handled. No details. Just handled. I stood there too long. I know I did because the motion sensor light went off, and the room dimmed until the only light was the faint LED numbers on the machines. Then the light clicked back on again, because I shifted my weight. I remember noticing, very clearly, that the stack was perfectly aligned, like someone had taken time to tap the edges on the table so they matched. That detail is what made it feel like a person did it. Not a glitch, not a dream, a person with patience. I didn't touch the stack. I backed out of the room and locked the door behind me like I was sealing something in. When I got back to the desk, the phone rang. It was a room calling to ask for extra towels. My voice came out normal when I answered. That's another thing that scares me when I think about it. How normal I could sound. After that night, I started watching the cameras differently. Not like a bored night employee, like someone trying to catch a thief. But the cameras were old, grainy. The angles were wrong. There were blind spots in every hallway. The employee corridor didn't have a camera at all, for privacy, which always seemed reasonable until it suddenly didn't. I tried staying in the lobby all night, not doing walks. The manager yelled at me the next day because a guest complained about noise on the third floor, and no one came. So I did the walks again, but I changed the timing. I made it unpredictable. I told myself if someone was messing with me, they wouldn't be able to plan around it. The weird thing was, the incident forms kept appearing no matter what I did. Sometimes there would be one, sometimes two, always with my name. Then one night, I came back from a walk and found an empty keycard envelope on the counter, the kind we hand to guests when they check in. It had a room number written on it in marker. 1. I stared at it, because 217 wasn't occupied. I knew it wasn't, because we weren't full, and I'd checked in everyone myself. I opened the computer. Room 217, vacant. I picked up the phone and called 217 anyway, because some part of me needed to hear it ring and go unanswered. It rang once, twice, then someone picked up. There was no greeting, just breathing, slow, like they'd been waiting. I said, "Hello." The breathing stopped. Then a voice, very quiet, said, "Handled," and hung up. The phone in my hand felt suddenly heavier, like it had turned into something solid and ancient. My scalp prickled. I didn't call back. I didn't go to the room. I sat there, staring at the monitor, watching the lobby camera feed, watching the empty chairs and the closed front doors, waiting for some sign that this was a prank. At 4:15 a.m., the printer under the desk started spitting out paper. I didn't send anything to print. I slid it out, and it was an incident form, printed, not handwritten. My name was typed neatly at the top, date, time, and in the description field, a single sentence, "Stop trying to remember." That's when I understood the shape of it. Not the details, not who, but the intention. It wasn't just someone messing with me. It was someone trying to train me. You know how you can train an animal with little rewards and punishments? How repetition becomes a kind of leash. This felt like that. Like someone wanted me to accept gaps, to stop asking questions, to let my nights blur. I did something I'm not proud of. I took the incident forms from the drawer, from the laundry room, every one I could find, and I put them in my backpack. I wanted proof. I wanted to take them home and lay them out on my kitchen table in the daylight and see if they still made sense. When my shift ended, I walked out to my car in the early morning gray. The parking lot was empty except for a few vehicles dusted with road salt. I got in my car, locked the doors, and opened my backpack. It was empty, not just the forms, everything, my lunch container, my charger, the little bottle of hand sanitizer I always carried, gone. I sat there with my hands on the steering wheel, not moving, because my brain kept trying to supply a reasonable explanation and failing. Then I looked up. Room 2, 17's curtains, 3rd floor, 2nd window from the end, were slightly open, just enough to see a sliver of darkness inside. And something moved behind them. Not a wave, not a silhouette, just a shift, like someone leaning away from the glass. I drove home with my shoulders tense the whole way, like I expected something to grab the back of my seat. I quit 2 days later. I told my manager I was having health issues. I didn't mention incident forms or phone calls. I didn't mention room 217. He nodded too quickly, like he'd heard it before. Like it was a script he'd practiced. And on my last night, when I went behind the desk to grab my jacket, I found one final incident form waiting in the drawer. It was blank, except for one line, written in block letters. Handled. I didn't take it. I left it there like an offering. I still sometimes wake up at 2:17 a.m. exactly. No alarm, no reason. Just my eyes opening into darkness, my body already tense, like something in me was trained. The next thing happened after I moved, which is why it took me so long to connect it to anything. I thought I'd left that strange training behind. New city, new job, new apartment. The kind of reset you tell yourself will make you normal again. The apartment was in an older building with thick walls and a narrow staircase that smelled like someone's cooking all the time. It was cheap, which was the main reason I took it. The landlord gave me the key in an envelope and said the previous tenant left suddenly, like it was gossip, like it was funny. On my first night there, I did the normal settling in things. I unpacked. I took a shower. I stood in the kitchen eating crackers because I hadn't bought real groceries yet. At around midnight, I heard a soft tapping. Not on my door, not on the wall, on the window. I froze with the cracker halfway to my mouth. I lived on the 3rd floor. There was no balcony, no fire escape outside my window. The tapping came again, delicate like someone tapping with a fingernail. 3 taps. Pause. 3 taps. I walked slowly toward the window. The blinds were down, but there was a gap at the bottom where the slats didn't quite meet. I knelt and looked through the gap. There was nothing, just the dark street, the glow of a streetlight, a parked car with a layer of dust. The tapping stopped. I told myself it was a tree branch, even though there wasn't a tree near my window, even though the rhythm felt deliberate. The next day, I went to work and tried not to think about it. That night, I fell asleep with the TV on low, more for company than sound. At 3:06 a.m., I woke up because the TV was off. The room was too quiet, not just night quiet. Quiet like the sound had been removed. I lay there listening, waiting for the building's usual noises. Pipes, someone flushing, a distant door. Nothing. Then I heard it. A soft tapping on the window. 3 taps. Pause. 3 taps. I didn't get up this time. I just listened, my heart beating hard enough that I could feel it in my throat. The tapping stopped after about a minute. Then from somewhere very close, so close it felt like it was inside the room, I heard a whisper. Not words, just the sound of someone exhaling with intention, like trying to speak but choosing not to. I sat up so fast my head spun. I looked around the room, even though I knew no one was there. My eyes landed on the window. The blinds were up. I hadn't raised them. I always slept with them down. I'd done it as part of my new apartment routine, like a little security ritual. But now they were raised halfway, and the window glass reflected my face back at me, pale, wide-eyed, superimposed over the dark outside. I got up and yanked the blinds down, hard enough that the slats clattered. I checked the lock. It was locked. I didn't sleep after that. I sat on my couch with all the lights on until morning, feeling ridiculous, and watched at the same time. The next week, small things started shifting in my apartment. Not dramatic, just wrong. A mug I always kept on the left side of the sink would be on the right. My shower curtain would be tucked inside the tub, like someone had been careful to keep water from getting on the floor. The chain on the ceiling fan would be switched, light on, fan off, when I always did the opposite. Each thing alone was nothing. Together it started to feel like someone was learning me. I put a piece of clear tape across my front door, low down near the bottom, so I'd know if it opened while I was gone. I smoothed it carefully so there were no bubbles, no easy way to peel it and re-stick it without leaving a wrinkle. When I came home that night, the tape was still there, but my apartment smelled used, like warm breath and fabric, like someone had been sitting in the room for a while and then left. I walked from room to room, checking corners like I expected to find someone hiding behind my shower curtain. Nothing. The windows were locked. The chain was on. I stood in my kitchen and realized my trash can lid was open. It was one of those step-lid cans. I always kept it closed because I hated the smell. I looked inside. On top of my trash was a small square of paper, folded neatly, like a note. I opened it. It was a list, handwritten in neat, careful letters. My routine. 7:10, leaves. 7:23, bus. 8:05, coffee. 12:12, lunch. 5:41, arrives home. Underneath, sleeps with TV on, blinds down, likes lights on in kitchen. I sat down on the floor because my legs stopped cooperating. My mouth went dry. I read it again and again, hoping I'd misread it, hoping it was some weird flyer, something that accidentally got into my trash. But it was my life. I didn't call the police. I should have. I know that. But at the time, I was thinking like a person who didn't want to be humiliated, like a person who wanted to be believed. So I did something else. I knocked on my neighbor's door. The apartment next to mine was always quiet. I'd seen a man once in the hallway, mid-30s maybe, polite smile, eyes that didn't quite settle on your face. He opened the door just a crack, chain on. "Hi," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "This is going to sound weird, but have you noticed anything strange in the building lately?" He blinked slowly. "Like what?" "Like," I said, and I hated how small my voice sounded. "Someone coming into apartments." His expression didn't change. He just stared at me for a second too long. Then he said softly, "No." And as he said it, I heard something behind him. A TV. Low volume, late-night talk show, laughter. The same show that had been on my TV when I woke up. I stared at him. He stared back. Then he said, "You should get some sleep. You look tired." And he closed the door. That night I slept at a friend's place. I told her I was freaked out by the building. I didn't show her the note. I didn't want to make it real. The next morning I went back to my apartment with my friend. We stood in the doorway together, like a little team, and I felt safer just because someone else's eyes were on my space. Everything looked normal until I went into the bedroom. My bed was made. Not how I make it. Better. Hospital corners, smooth. And on my pillow, centered like a gift, was my TV remote. The batteries had been removed and placed next to it, perfectly aligned. My friend laughed nervously and said, "Maybe the landlord came in." but the way she said it didn't match her face. Her eyes were tight. She was trying to give me an out. I walked into the living room and opened the drawer where I kept the spare keys. The envelope the landlord gave me, the one with my key in it, was there. And inside, behind the cardboard flap, was another key, a key I didn't recognize. It was labeled in faint marker. 217. I moved out within a week. I didn't give notice. I didn't ask for my deposit back. I just left. And when I handed the keys to the landlord, he didn't look surprised. He didn't ask why. He just said, "You're doing the right thing." Like he'd been waiting for me to figure it out. After that, my sense of safety got thin, like glass. I could still function, but everything felt like it could crack if touched the wrong way. Which is probably why the next thing got to me so deeply, even though it started in the most ordinary place. A commute. I took the same train every morning for months. Same station, same platform, same smell of coffee and damp concrete. I got used to the rhythm of it, the announcements, the doors, the way everyone stared at their phones like their faces were being pulled downward by gravity. There was a man who always got on at the same stop as me. I noticed him because he wore the same jacket every day, a dark green windbreaker, and he had a way of standing too close to the edge of the platform like he didn't care if the train hit him. Not in a dramatic way, in a lazy way. I'm not the kind of person who thinks everyone is a threat. I'm really not. But after the hotel, after the apartment, my attention got sharp. I couldn't stop noticing patterns. The man in the green jacket became part of the background pattern of my mornings. I didn't speak to him. I didn't even look at him directly after a while. He was just there. Then one morning I missed my stop. It happens. People doze off. They read too deeply. I'd been sleeping poorly and the train was warm and my brain was always tired. But when I looked up and realized I'd missed it, my stomach went cold. Because I was 2 stops past it, and I had no memory of the train stopping at my station, no memory of the doors opening, no memory of the usual surge of people leaving and entering. I told myself I must have zoned out. I got off at the next station, crossed the platform, and took the train back. When I got to work, my coworker joked about me being late. I laughed like it was nothing. The next morning, it happened again. This time, I set an alarm on my phone for 1 stop before mine. I held the phone in my hand. I watched the screen. I told myself I'd stay alert. The alarm went off. I turned it off. I sat there with my eyes open, and then nothing. Not like fainting, not like sleeping, just a gap, like someone had cut a piece out of my morning. I came back at a station I didn't recognize, staring at an advertisement across from me. My hands were folded in my lap like I was a child waiting politely. I got off the train with my heart hammering. I looked around. The station signs said I was 4 stops past where I should be. 4. I sat on a bench and tried to breathe. I checked my phone. There were no missed calls, no weird texts, no evidence of anything except the time. 40 minutes had passed. I thought maybe I was sick. Maybe I needed to see a doctor. Maybe I was dissociating, having some kind of stress response. So I made another test. A stupid one, but I was desperate for something concrete. The next day I wrote a word on my wrist in pen. Stay. I wrote it big enough that I couldn't miss it, on the inside of my wrist where my skin is pale. I got on the train. I stood instead of sitting. I held the pole and stared at my own wrist like it was an anchor. The train moved, People shifted. The man in the green jacket stood a few feet away, staring at his phone. I watched my wrist. And then I was sitting. Not just sitting. Sitting in a different seat, farther down the car, by the window. My hand was still on the pole, but the pole was in front of someone else. My body position didn't make sense. I looked down at my wrist. The word stay had been smeared, like someone had rubbed it with a thumb. It wasn't gone, but it was blurred, like an erased warning. I stood up quickly, gripping the overhead bar, and the movement made a woman look at me with annoyance. I looked around, panicked, trying to find something, someone, that would explain how I'd moved without remembering. That's when I saw him, the man in the green jacket. He was looking at me, not at his phone, at me, and he gave me a small, tired smile. The kind of smile you give someone when they're being difficult. Then he looked away and got off the train, at my stop, my actual stop. Like nothing had happened. I stumbled off too, my heart somewhat racing. I followed him at a distance, trying to keep him in sight. He walked calmly up the stairs, through the turnstiles, and out onto the street. He didn't hurry. He didn't look back. He moved like he belonged there. I followed him past a coffee shop, past a newsstand, around a corner. Then he turned into a building. Not my office building, a different one. An older building with tinted glass doors and a lobby you could barely see into. He swiped a card and went inside. I stood across the street, pretending to look at my phone, my mind scrambling. I had an urge to run up and confront him, to demand answers like this was a movie, and I could force the plot to explain itself. But real life doesn't work that way. Real life punishes you for approaching strangers with fear in your eyes. So I did something else. I went to work and spent the whole day feeling like I'd left part of myself on the train. That night, I checked my phone's health app, the one that tracks steps. I'd never really looked at it before. It showed a weird spike during my commute. A lot of steps, more than usual, like I'd been walking up and down the train car, pacing, but I hadn't. It also showed a brief period where my heart rate was elevated, then suddenly flatlined into a calm, not dead, just calm, too calm. The next day, I took a different train, different time, different route. I wanted to break the pattern. I got on, sat down, and tried to relax. I made it 3 stops before I noticed something that made my skin crawl. Across from me, on the seat, someone had carved a word into the plastic with something sharp. Handled. I stared at it for the rest of the ride, trying to convince myself it was coincidence. Trying to convince myself it was just a common word someone wrote, like love or help. But who carves handled into a seat? When I got off at my stop, I looked around like I was expecting to see the man in the green jacket. I didn't. But I did see something else. A reflection. In the glass of a vending machine near the exit, I saw myself walking behind me. Not exactly behind me. A few steps back, at the same pace, matching my movements like a delayed mirror. I turned around quickly. There was no one there. Just commuters moving around me like water around a rock. I started driving to work after that. It cost more, it took longer, but at least when I sat in my car, I could account for every second, every stoplight, every turn. For a while, I felt better, until I found a transit card in my coat pocket one day, a card I didn't own, one I hadn't bought. It was loaded with money. And on the back, written in neat block letters, was my name. I threw it away. I threw it in a public trash can far from my apartment. I watched it disappear under coffee cups and wrappers like it was being buried. But for months after, I'd still sometimes lose small bits of time. Not on trains anymore, in grocery store aisles, in parking lots, in my own hallway. It wasn't huge, just enough to make me doubt my own continuity. And that's the real horror of it, I think. Not that something happens, but that your mind becomes an unreliable witness to your own life. The fourth thing happened when I agreed to house sit for my aunt. It was supposed to be easy. Water her plants, bring in mail, make the place look lived in. Her house was in the suburbs. Quiet street, neighbors who waved, the kind of place where you can hear sprinklers ticking at night. I arrived with a duffel bag, unlocked the door, and immediately felt that particular smell of someone else's home. Fabric softener, old books, a hint of something floral that never quite leaves. My aunt's house had a security system. She showed me how to use it. She gave me a code. "Don't forget," she said. "It announces when doors open." It did. A little voice from the keypad would say, "Front door, back door, garage." The first night, I watched a movie in the living room and fell asleep on the couch. I woke around 1 a.m. with my neck stiff, the TV glowing blue on a paused screen. I went upstairs to the guest room and got into bed. At 3:12 a.m., I woke up to the keypad downstairs announcing clearly, "Back door." I sat up so fast I felt dizzy. Then a pause. Then, "Back door," like it was opening and closing. I lay there listening, holding my breath. No footsteps, no alarms. The system didn't trigger an alert, which meant someone had either entered the correct code or the door had opened without being armed. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight. My hands were shaking so badly the light jittered on the walls. I crept downstairs, every step on the staircase feeling loud enough to wake the neighborhood. When I got to the kitchen, the back door was closed. The lock was turned. I checked the keypad. The system said it was armed. No alerts. I went back upstairs and tried to convince myself it was a glitch. Some sensor hiccup. Technology being technology. The next night, it happened again. Back door. Pause. Back door. This time I didn't go downstairs. I stayed in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening for movement. Nothing. In the morning I checked the back door. Still locked. No signs of forced entry. Nothing missing. On the third night I decided to test it. I armed the system, then I placed a small strip of painter's tape across the edge of the back door, like a seal. If the door opened, even slightly, the tape would tear. Then I went upstairs and waited. At 3:12 a.m. exactly, the keypad announced, "Back door." My skin prickled. Pause. Back door. I waited a full minute. Then I went downstairs with my phone light on. The tape across the door was intact, perfect, unbroken. I stood there staring at it, and the feeling that came over me wasn't fear exactly. It was confusion so deep, it made my body feel heavy. Then I noticed something on the kitchen table. A glass of water, half full. I hadn't poured it. I stood there staring at that glass, and I had the sudden certainty that if I touched it, something in me would change. Like the glass was a boundary. I didn't touch it. I poured it down the sink without picking it up, just tipped it gently until it spilled, and then I washed my hands until they were red. The next day, I called my aunt to ask if she'd ever had issues with the security system. She laughed lightly. "No, why?" I told her the back door sensor kept announcing. I tried to make it sound casual. There was a pause on the line. A pause long enough that I could hear the faint background noise of wherever she was. An airport, maybe, or a hotel lobby. Then she said carefully, "Don't use the back door." I blinked. "Why?" Another pause. "I don't like it," she said. "That's all." I wanted to push. I wanted to demand an adult explanation. But something in her voice, the way it tightened, made me stop. That night I sat in the living room with the lights on, trying to stay awake, past 3:12. I made coffee. I scrolled my phone. I watched the clock like I was waiting for a train. At 3:10, my eyelids felt suddenly heavy. Not normal sleepy. Heavy like someone had put weights on them. My head dipped, my chin hitting my chest. I jerked awake and looked at the clock. 3:14. My heart started pounding. 2 minutes gone. Just gone. Then the keypad announced, "Back door." I stood up so fast the coffee table rattled. I walked to the kitchen. The back door was open, not wide, just enough to let in a thin slice of night air, enough to make the curtains move slightly. I could smell wet grass. The tape I'd placed earlier was gone. Not torn. Gone. I walked slowly to the door and looked outside. The backyard was dark. The moonlight made the lawn look silver. The fence line was still. Then from somewhere near the fence I heard a soft sound. Not a voice, not a footstep. A sound like someone exhaling through their nose, amused. I closed the back door quietly and locked it. Then I turned and looked at the kitchen table. The glass of water was there again, half full. Next to it was a small square of paper, folded. My stomach tightened. I unfolded it with fingertips that felt numb. It was written in neat block letters. "You always fall asleep at 3:12. I stared at it until my eyes burned. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I sat with the lights on, every door locked, every window checked, feeling like my body was being observed as a predictable machine. In the morning I packed my bag. I left early. I told my aunt I had an emergency and couldn't stay. She didn't argue. She didn't ask what happened. She just said softly, "Okay, I understand," like she really did. On my drive home, I kept checking the rearview mirror, not because I thought someone was following me, but because I couldn't shake the feeling that I had left part of myself in that house. That something had measured me, timed me, and filed the information away. The fifth thing was quieter, and in some ways it's the one that haunts me the most because it didn't feel like a stranger. It felt like work, normal life, the place you're supposed to be safest because it's familiar and boring. I worked in an office for a while where everything lived on shared drives, spreadsheets, documents, meeting notes. Everyone had access to folders they probably shouldn't have had access to because that's how offices are. Convenience over security. One afternoon I was looking for a file and clicked into an old folder labeled Archive. Inside were subfolders with years. I clicked a year at random. Inside that year were more folders. Most were empty. Some had meeting notes. Then I saw a folder with my name. That's normal sometimes. People store personal performance reviews, onboarding documents. But I'd never seen this folder before. I clicked it. Inside were photos, not selfies, not something I'd taken. Photos of me. Me sitting at my desk, looking at my monitor. Me walking to the break room, holding a mug. Me in the parking lot by my car, looking down at my phone. They were taken from angles that felt hidden, like from behind a plant, or through a gap in a cubicle wall. My mouth went dry. My fingers hovered over the mouse. I clicked another file, a text document. It opened, and at first it looked like gibberish, random letters and numbers. Then I scrolled, and I saw patterns, dates, times, short notes. Arrived 8:52. Skipped lunch. Seemed tired. Stayed late. Talked to manager. It was a log of me. I sat there staring at the screen, my body cold, my mind scrambling for an explanation that didn't involve someone watching me. I looked at the file properties, created by IT-ADMIN, modified multiple times. I closed the folder and looked around the office, suddenly aware of how many eyes could be on me without me noticing. People at their desks, people in conference rooms, people behind glass. I stood up and walked to the IT department. My legs felt weird, like my body wasn't quite attached to the floor. The IT area was behind a door with a keypad. I knocked, and a guy named Darren opened it. He was friendly, always talking about new gadgets, always offering to help. "Hey," he said, "what's up?" I tried to smile. I found a folder on the shared drive with my name. It has stuff in it, photos. Darren's expression didn't change at first, but his eyes did. They narrowed slightly, like a camera adjusting focus. He leaned back against the door frame. "What folder?" "Archive," I said. Then the year, then my name. He nodded slowly. "Huh." He didn't seem surprised. That was the first thing that hit me. If someone told me they'd found secret photos of themselves on a work drive, I'd look shocked. I'd ask questions. I'd act like a human. Darren just nodded, like I'd told him the printer was low on toner. "I can take a look," he said. I said, "I want it deleted." Another slow nod. "Okay." I watched him type on his computer. He clicked around, eyes calm, fingers steady. Then he said, "It's gone." I said, "Just like that?" He looked up at me. "Yeah, probably an old test folder. Nothing to worry about." My throat tightened. Those photos were taken recently. Darren's gaze held mine for a second too long. Then he said softly, "You should be careful where you click." I stared at him. "What?" He smiled a little, like he was trying to defuse tension. "Just shared drives get messy. Lots of people have access. You don't want to accidentally open stuff that isn't yours." I left IT with my heart pounding. Back at my desk, I opened the shared drive again. I navigated to the archive folder. The folder with my name was gone. But now there was a new folder. Not my name, just handled. I clicked it, even though every instinct screamed not to. Inside was one file, a text document. I opened it. It contained a single sentence. "Some things are safer when you don't name them." I closed the file. I deleted it. I emptied my recycle bin. I tried to erase it like it was a spider crawling across my screen. The next day, HR called me in. They sat me down with polite smiles and told me they were concerned about my well-being. They said there had been reports that I seemed stressed, that I'd been distracted, that I'd been looking through files I shouldn't. They framed it like care, like support, like kindness. But the message underneath was simple. "We see you. We control the story. Don't make noise." I quit that job the next week. I didn't tell them why. I just left. And I know how that sounds. Like I run away from everything. Like I'm the common denominator. Like I'm paranoid. But what scares me is not that I left. What scares me is the way the world let me leave quietly. Like it wanted me to go without making a scene. The last thing I'll tell you about is recent. It's the one that made me realize the theme in all of it isn't a place or a person. It's a method. It started with sleep. After everything, the hotel, the apartment, The train gaps, my aunt's house, the office folder. I couldn't sleep like a normal person anymore. I'd fall asleep exhausted and wake up wired. I'd wake at specific times without knowing why. My body felt trained to be alert in the wrong ways. So I did what people do now. I tried an app. One of those sleep apps that plays white noise, rain sounds, ocean waves, all the comforting audio textures that make your brain feel less alone. I picked a track called Soft Room Fan. It was simple, just a steady hum, like the background of a safe house. The first few nights it helped. I fell asleep faster. Then on the fourth night, I woke up around 2 a.m. because the sound changed. The fan had a tiny break in it, like a stutter, a brief silence. Then it resumed. I lay there listening. The stutter happened again, exactly a minute later. Silence. Hum. Silence. Hum. I sat up and looked at my phone. The app was still playing. The track timer was moving. I thought maybe it was buffering, even though the track was downloaded. I turned the volume up slightly and listened closer. In the silent gaps, I could hear something else. Not words, not music. A faint sound like a room tone, like a microphone picking up space. Then very softly, a click, like a button being pressed. The next silent gap, I heard breathing. It was far away, but it was human, slow, controlled. I stared at my phone, my skin prickling. I closed the app. The room went quiet. I sat there, listening to the real silence, the kind with faint city sounds and the soft creak of a building. Nothing. I told myself it was a glitch, some weird audio artifact. My brain, already trained to panic, trying to find patterns. The next night, I played the same track again because part of me wanted to prove it was nothing. Around 2 a.m., the stutter started. Silence. Hum. Silence. Hum. And in the silence, clearer this time, I heard a voice, very quiet, very close to the microphone. It said my name, not shouted, not dramatic, just spoken like someone checking a box. I slammed the phone face down like it had burned me. The sound stopped, muffled under the blanket. I sat up, breathing hard. My room felt suddenly wrong, like the corners were sharper. I picked up the phone with shaking hands and opened the app again. The track title was still Soft Room Fan. The timer was still moving, but the small text under it, where it usually lists the creator, was different. It said, Custom. I didn't remember making a custom track. I checked my library. There was a section called Recordings. I clicked it. There were files, dates and times, recordings made while I slept. I felt sick. I scrolled, my thumb moving too fast, like I couldn't slow down even though I wanted to stop. Some recordings were just the sound of my room, a car passing outside, a distant dog bark, the tiny noises of a person sleeping alone, but some had other things. A soft thump, like a footstep, a click, a low whisper that the app didn't label because it didn't know what it was. I played one, holding the phone close. At first, just room tone, then a sound like fabric shifting, close to the microphone. Then, very softly, someone exhaled, amused. And then a voice barely above a whisper said, Handled. I turned the phone off. I didn't just close the app. I powered it down like it was a dangerous object. I sat on the edge of my bed in the dark, listening to the real room, trying to decide if any of this could be explained by hacking, by bugs, by my own mind. I know sleep apps sometimes record to detect snoring or sleep talking. I know microphones exist. I know we carry little listening devices in our pockets willingly. But I also know what that sounded like. It sounded like someone using my own tools to get closer. The next day, in the light, I tried to be rational. I opened the app settings. I looked for recording options. There was a feature I'd never seen before. Sleep journal, auto notes. It had been turned on. There were notes. Short, time-stamped lines. 2:17, woke briefly. 3:12, deep sleep. 5:41, restless. I stared at those numbers until my eyes blurred. 2:17, 3:12, 5:41. Times that kept showing up in my life like fingerprints. I turned off every permission. I deleted the app. I deleted the recordings. I reset my phone. I changed passwords. I did everything people tell you to do when something feels compromised. And still, for weeks, I'd wake in the night convinced I heard a tiny click, like a recording starting. Sometimes I'd check my phone and see nothing. Sometimes I'd find my phone on the other side of the room when I was sure I'd left it on the nightstand. And once, just once, I woke up with a small ink mark on the inside of my wrist, a smudged word, like it had been written and rubbed away in my sleep. It looked like it could have been anything, but I knew what it said. Stay. I don't tell these things to people in my life, not the whole shape of it. I've learned that if you describe something that doesn't fit into easy categories, people try to force it into one. They'll call it stress. They'll call it anxiety. They'll call it coincidence. They'll call it a story. And maybe that's part of why it works. Whatever it is, the world is set up to smooth down anything jagged, anything that doesn't fit, until you start doing it to yourself. So I keep my routines simple now. I don't use sleep apps. I don't take trains. I don't work night shifts. I keep my blinds down. Then I second-guess that and raise them. Then I lower them again, like I'm trying to outsmart a pattern that might already know me better than I know myself. Because every time I try to keep it in my head, it doesn't stay there. It leaks into my sleep. It leaks into my days. It leaks into those quiet moments when you're sure you're alone, and the house is settled, and everything is fine. And then you notice something small, and you realize you've been living next to a mistake. The first time I understood that small can be terrifying, I was working nights at a hotel off the highway. Nothing fancy. 2 floors. A lobby that always smelled like lemon cleaner and burnt coffee. The kind of place where people stayed for 1 night, maybe 2, and left behind crumpled receipts and damp towels and sometimes a weird little heaviness in the air that came from too many lives passing through without ever really stopping. I liked the night shift. I liked the predictable loneliness. A few late check-ins, maybe a complaint about the ice machine, then hours of nothing but the hum of vending machines and the blue light of the security monitors. Most nights I'd read, or watch videos with the volume low, or do that thing everyone does at work when there's no work, where you reorganize a drawer that doesn't need reorganizing just to feel like time is moving. I had my routines. I knew which ceiling tile in the lobby had a hairline crack. I knew the soda machine sometimes $8 unless you fed it bills slowly. I knew the sound the front doors made when someone came in, soft, like the building was sighing. And I knew the guest list. That's important, because the guest list was my map. It told me who was in-house, what room they were in, how many nights they'd paid for, if they'd requested a wake-up call or a crib or extra towels. It was the difference between feeling in control and feeling like I was sitting alone in a big box full of strangers. One Tuesday night, early fall. I remember that much because I could smell leaves on people's clothes when they came in. A man checked in around 11:40. He was, normal. That's what messed me up later. If he'd been obviously sketchy, if he'd been sweating, if he'd been loud or aggressive, I would have filed him away as a problem. But he wasn't a problem. He was polite. He kept his voice low, like he didn't want to disturb anyone. He had one small suitcase and an old backpack. He gave me a driver's license and a credit card. The name on the license was plain. The photo looked like him. Nothing jumped out. I remember noticing his hands, not in a creepy way, just they were very clean, like he'd scrubbed them hard. The skin around the nails was pink, raw in a way that made me think of someone who washes too much. When I typed his name into the system, the reservation popped up immediately. One night. Paid. Room 214. I gave him the key cards and did my little speech about breakfast hours and Wi-Fi password, and the ice machine being on the first floor near the vending area. He nodded at the right moments. Then he paused, like he was going to ask a question, and instead he just said, "If someone calls for me, don't put it through." I blinked. "Sure. Do you want me to take a message?" He thought for a second. "No message. Just tell them I'm not here." It wasn't unheard of. People hiding from exes, angry relatives, collection calls. So I said okay. He thanked me, took his key cards, and walked toward the stairs. We had an elevator, but a lot of people didn't like it. It was old, and it made a scraping sound that always seemed worse at night. The front doors side closed behind him, and the lobby went back to humming. The rest of the night was nothing. I remember that, too, because when something is truly strange, your brain clings to the normal parts, like proof you didn't imagine it. Around 2:15 a.m., the phone rang. That lobby phone had a particular ring, sharp and too cheerful for the hour. I answered with my script voice, the one that sounded awake even when I wasn't. A man's voice came through, quiet and flat. "Room 214, please." I pulled up the guest list. "May I ask who's calling?" There was a tiny pause. "A friend." "I'm sorry," I said automatically, but the guest in 214 requested no calls. Another pause. This one felt heavier, like the silence had weight. Then the voice said, "Is he there?" "I can't confirm." "Is he there?" The voice repeated, exactly the same, like a recording. My skin prickled, not because of what he asked, because of how it sounded. No emotion, no irritation, just a statement, waiting to be answered correctly. "I'm sorry," I said again, more firmly. "I can't help you." And then softly, the voice said, "He's not supposed to be there." I felt my mouth go dry. "Excuse me?" The line went dead. I sat there for a moment with the receiver in my hand, listening to the empty tone. I told myself it was a prank, some weird inside joke, someone trying to freak out the night clerk. I hung up, wrote a quick note in the log. Caller asked for 214. Guest requested no calls. Caller said, "Not supposed to be there," and tried to laugh it off. But I kept glancing at the security monitors. Our cameras were old, grainy, with that slight delay that makes everything look like it happened a second ago. On the screen for the second-floor hallway, the carpet pattern made a long tunnel toward the rooms. At first, nothing moved. Then on the little square labeled 2F East, I saw a door open. Not all the way, just a crack. Room 214. I leaned closer to the screen, squinting at the pixels. The door didn't swing. It didn't widen. It just sat there, cracked open like someone had opened it, and stopped halfway, listening. A minute passed. Then it eased shut again. I stared at that door on the monitor until my eyes burned. I told myself maybe he'd stepped out for ice. Maybe he'd checked the hallway and decided not to go. It was fine. It was normal. I was making it weird because of a creepy phone call. At 3:40 a.m., I did my hallway walk. That was policy. Once a shift, the night clerk walks the property, checks the exterior doors, the laundry room, the stairwells. Mostly it was to keep you from sitting too long and falling asleep, but they called it security. I took my flashlight and my master key and went up the stairs. The second floor smelled like detergent and old carpet. The hallway lights buzzed faintly, and every few feet one of them had that flicker like it was thinking about dying. I walked slowly, listening. Most rooms were quiet. Some had the low murmur of a TV. One had a baby crying far away, muffled by walls. When I got near 214, I slowed down without meaning to. The door was closed. There was a "Do Not Disturb" sign on the handle. That sign hadn't been there earlier. I knew because I'd watched him go up, and I'd watched the door crack open later, and I would have noticed a sign swinging. I stood there and stared at it, my flashlight beam trembling slightly in my hand. The sign looked new, crisp, like it hadn't been touched by 100 hands. I leaned in, just enough to look at the gap under the door. A thin line of light showed through, like a TV was on inside. Then I heard something. Not a voice, not footsteps, just a soft rhythmic sound, like someone tapping a fingernail against wood. 3 taps. Pause. 3 taps. Like a pattern. I took a step back, suddenly aware of how empty the hallway felt, how far away the stairs were, how the light behind me seemed colder than the light in front of me. I told myself not to be ridiculous. It was a guest in a room. People do weird things. People tap. People pace. People can't sleep. Still, I didn't knock. I didn't want to. I finished my walk, checked the stairwell doors, came back down, and sat behind the front desk, with my hands under my thighs so I wouldn't chew my nails. The rest of the shift crawled. At 6:30, the morning clerk came in. The lobby brightened in that way it does when daylight touches it, and suddenly all the corners look less deep. I gave her the rundown, a late check-in, a weird phone call, nothing else. I didn't mention the tapping. I don't know why. Maybe because saying it out loud would make it real. She nodded, half listening, already thinking about coffee and breakfast rush. I clocked out and went home. That day I slept badly. Kept waking up with the feeling that I'd missed something. When I came in the next night, the morning clerk waved me over as soon as I walked in. "You're gonna laugh," she said, flipping through the paperwork. "That guy in 214, he never checked out." My stomach dipped. "What do you mean?" "He left the key cards in the room. Bed looked untouched, towels unused, like he never slept there." "That's not possible," I said too fast. "I checked him in." She shrugged. "Well, the system's weird. It says the reservation was canceled." I stared at her. Canceled by who? By someone. She turned the screen so I could see. There was a note. "Res canceled. Duplicate booking." "But I printed his reg card. I saw his license." She pursed her lips like she didn't want to argue. "Maybe you checked him into the wrong room?" "No," I said. "It was 214. She gave me that look, half concern, half amusement, that people give when they think you're tired. Then she added more quietly, "Housekeeping found something, though, in the drawer." like a note. She handed me a small piece of hotel stationery. On it, in neat handwriting, it said, "Please don't put me through." No name, no room number, just that. My mouth went dry again, the same way it had on the phone. I looked up at her. Where was this? Top drawer of the nightstand. She laughed a little. Weird, right? Maybe he wrote it for you. My fingers tightened on the paper, because I hadn't told him those exact words. I'd said, "Do you want me to take a message?" He'd said, "No message." And then later the caller had said, "Room 214, please." And I had said, "I'm sorry," but the guest requested no calls. I never said, "Put it through." But someone in that room wrote exactly that phrase like they'd heard it. I worked there another 3 months. Nothing else like that happened. Not exactly. But sometimes, when I was alone at the desk in the early hours, the lobby phone would light up like it was about to ring. And then it wouldn't. Just a blink. A promise. And then silence again. I quit eventually for normal reasons. Better job, better hours. But even now when my phone rings late at night, I feel that old dryness in my mouth, and I wait for the voice that doesn't sound like it belongs to a person to say something simple. Something wrong. The second time I realized my life could be touched without my permission. I was living in an apartment building with thin walls and polite neighbors. It was the kind of place where you could hear someone's microwave beep through the ceiling, where arguments traveled through vents like smoke, where you learned other people's routines without meaning to. I wasn't unhappy there. It was affordable, close to work, safe enough. There was one thing I didn't love. The laundry room. It was in the basement, down a set of stairs that always smelled faintly of damp concrete, 2 washers, 2 dryers, a folding table that wobbled, and a bulletin board filled with old flyers for dog walkers and guitar lessons. You'd go down there with your basket, swipe your card, set a timer, and then either sit on the plastic chair and scroll your phone, or go back upstairs and hope no one stole your socks. I'd had a few small things go missing. A washcloth, a cheap t-shirt, nothing worth getting dramatic over. Then one Saturday morning, I went down to switch my clothes to the dryer and found someone else's laundry in my washer, not mixed with mine, completely replacing it. My wet clothes were gone. In their place, a load of dark towels and a few men's shirts. At first I thought I'd made a mistake, that I'd used the wrong machine. But I always used the left washer because the right one made that squealing sound. And I knew, because my detergent bottle was still sitting on the washer lid, right where I'd left it. My chest tightened. I opened the washer again, dug through as if my clothes might be hidden underneath. They weren't. I looked around the room, half expecting someone to step out of nowhere and say, "Oh, sorry, I thought." No one did. I checked the dryers. Empty. I checked the folding table. Nothing. I went upstairs, wet soap smell clinging to my hands, and knocked on the door of the building manager. She was an older woman with a tight bun and a habit of talking like everything was your fault. I explained what happened. She frowned. "You probably left them in the dryer, and someone took them." "I never put them in the dryer," I said. "They were in the washer." She sighed like I was making her day hard on purpose. "Well, I can send a reminder email about laundry etiquette. That doesn't get my clothes back." She narrowed her eyes. "Did you write your apartment number on your basket?" "No." "There you go," she said, like she'd solved it. I left her office feeling stupid and angry, and under that, unsettled in a way I couldn't name. It wasn't the loss. I could replace the clothes. It was the replacement. The fact that someone had opened the washer, removed my wet clothes, and put their own in, then walked away without finishing the cycle. It felt deliberate, like an interruption, like someone inserting themselves into my routine. That night I went down to the laundry room again, even though I didn't need to do laundry. I told myself I was just being cautious, curious. I sat on the plastic chair, scrolling, watching the door reflected in the black glass of the dryer. After about 10 minutes, the door opened, and a man walked in. I'd seen him before, not often, but enough to recognize him as one of the neighbors. Mid-30s, maybe. Skinny, always in neutral colors. The kind of face you don't remember clearly after you look away. He nodded at me, polite, then walked to the right washer and opened it, like he expected something to be inside. He paused, then he closed it again and looked at the left washer. My washer. He stared at it for a moment. Then he glanced at me, smiled slightly, and said, "Busy day." I forced a smile back. "Yeah." He stood there with his laundry basket on the floor, not moving. Then softly he said, "Did you lose something?" My throat tightened. "What do you mean?" He tilted his head. "People lose things down here." I tried to keep my voice light. "Someone took my clothes earlier." He made a sympathetic sound. "That's a shame." Then he reached into his basket and pulled out a single sock. Not just any sock, a white ankle sock with a small blue stripe near the cuff. One of mine. I froze. He held it between his fingers, like a little flag. "This yours?" My heart started to thump hard enough I could feel it in my neck. "Yes." He frowned, as if confused. "Oh." He dropped it back into his basket. I found it in the corner. I stood up so fast the chair scraped. "Where are the rest of my clothes?" He blinked at me, eyes wide with innocent surprise. "I don't know what you're talking about. You have my sock." I said I found it. He repeated, still calm, "If you want it, you can have it." He held his basket toward me. I didn't take it. I felt suddenly very aware of how deep underground we were, how the stairwell behind me was the only way out, how the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like insects. "Just give it back," I said, quieter. He stared at me for a moment, then smiled again. "You seem tired." And that was the first time he said something that didn't match the situation. Not a threat, not an insult, just a little wrong, like he was reading from a script and skipped a line. I turned and walked out without the sock. I went back to my apartment, locked the door, checked the deadbolt twice, and sat on my couch with my phone in my hand. I almost called the police. But what would I say? My neighbor has a sock that looks like mine. I tried to breathe. I tried to be rational. Later that week, I found my missing clothes folded neatly in a cardboard box outside my door. No note, no explanation. Just my clothes, clean and dry, folded in a way I didn't fold them. Tighter, more precise. I stared at that box for a long time. Then I brought it inside because leaving it in the hallway felt worse, like refusing a gift. I washed everyone again, twice. I told myself it was over. But after that, small things started happening. I'd come home, and the throw pillow on my bed would be turned the wrong direction. I'd put a spoon in the sink, and later it would be in the dish rack. Clean, even though I knew I hadn't washed it. I'd wake up, and the bathroom light would be on. Little changes, little corrections, and every time I'd question myself first. Did I forget? Did I do it without thinking? Was I just stressed? I started taking photos of my apartment before I left for work. Not because I thought I was being watched, because I didn't trust my own memory. That's what he took from me, piece by piece, not my clothes, my certainty. One night I came home and found the photos on my phone had been deleted. Not all of them, just the ones from that day. My hands shook as I scrolled, looking for them. Gone. I sat on the floor by the door, my keys still in my hand, and I tried to think of any reason that could happen on accident. There wasn't one. My phone had been in my pocket all day, unless... I didn't want to finish that thought. I ended up sleeping with a chair wedged under my doorknob like in those old movies. And for a while, nothing happened. Then, about 2 weeks later, I ran into that man in the hallway. He was carrying groceries. He stopped when he saw me, like he'd been waiting for that exact moment. He smiled and said, "You're doing better." My skin went cold. Doing better about what? He blinked slowly. About remembering. I didn't speak. I couldn't. He shifted the grocery bag in his hand. "You should write things down. It helps." Then he walked past me, keys jangling softly, and went into the apartment across the hall. Across the hall. Not down the hall like I'd assumed. Across. He'd been right there the whole time, close enough to hear me lock my door, close enough to watch my routine, close enough to know when I'd started taking photos, and close enough to do something about it. I moved out the next month. I told people it was for a better commute, for more space, for a change. I didn't tell them that sometimes, even now in my new place, I'll catch myself pausing in the middle of a room, unable to remember what I was about to do. And my first thought isn't I'm tired. It's, did someone teach me to forget? After that apartment, I got obsessive about being in control of my life. I made lists. I double-checked locks. I kept my phone on me constantly. So it's almost funny, in a bitter way, that the next thing happened while I was doing one of the most controlled, tracked jobs you can do. I drove for a rideshare service for extra money, not full-time, just evenings and weekends. It helped pay down some debt, and I liked the feeling of being busy, like if I kept moving, nothing could catch up to me. Most passengers blur together after a while. You learn to read people quickly, who wants to talk, who wants silence, who's drunk but harmless, who might be trouble. You also learn the small rituals of safety. Keep the doors locked until you confirm the name. Check the back seat after each ride. Don't let anyone sit in the front unless there's a reason. One Friday night, I got a pickup request from a quiet neighborhood. The app showed a name, Mara. The pickup pin was in front of a house with no porch light on. When I pulled up, the street was empty. No one waiting, no movement. I parked and waited, watching the timer count down. After about a minute, a woman stepped out from between two parked cars. That's the first thing I didn't like. Not from a front door, not from a driveway. From between cars, like she'd been standing there in the dark. She approached the back passenger door and opened it without checking the license plate, without asking my name. She slid in and shut the door. I glanced at her in the rearview mirror. Her face was partially shadowed, but I could see she looked tired, not drunk, just worn down. I forced my voice to stay normal. "Hi, Mara." She didn't answer right away. Then she said, "Yes," single word, flat. I started the trip. The destination was set for a shopping center, about 15 minutes away. Odd, because everything was closed at that hour. But people set weird destinations sometimes. For the first few minutes, she didn't move, didn't adjust the seatbelt, didn't look at her phone, just sat very still. The car felt too quiet, even with the radio on low. I tried a simple question. Long night? No answer. I turned the radio down further, listening. I could hear her breathing. Slow, controlled. At a red light, I glanced back again. Her eyes were fixed on the back of my headrest. Not on the window, not on her lap. On the headrest, like she was studying it. I looked forward again quickly. My pulse was up, but I told myself to stop being paranoid. Halfway through the ride, my phone, mounted on the dash, lit up with a notification. A voicemail from my own number. I frowned. That happens sometimes with glitchy carrier stuff. Spam calls, spoofing numbers. Still, it made my skin prickle. I didn't tap it. I kept driving. Then from the back seat, the woman said very softly, "Play it." My hands tightened on the steering wheel. I didn't answer. She repeated, a little clearer, "Play the voicemail." I laughed once, a nervous sound. I can't. I'm driving." "You can," she said. "You just don't want to." The light ahead turned green. I drove through, heart pounding, trying to keep my face calm. "How did you even see that?" I asked before I could stop myself. She didn't respond. A few minutes later, my phone lit up again. Another voicemail from my own number. My throat went tight. "Okay," I said, more to myself than her. "Okay, stop." From the back seat, she whispered, "You don't remember what you say when you're alone." I felt a cold wash move down my back. I tried to keep my voice steady. "What are you talking about?" She leaned forward slightly. I could see the movement in the mirror, the way her shoulders rose. And then she said my full name. First, middle, last. No one in the app had that. Riders see your first name only. I swallowed. "How do you know that?" She leaned back again like she'd proven a point and didn't need to do more. The destination was coming up. A dark shopping center parking lot. Most of the lights off except a few buzzing poles. The app directed me to a spot near the far edge, away from the closed stores. I didn't want to go there. I wanted to keep driving, to head towards somewhere bright and public. But the app's timer was running, and I didn't want to give her a reason to get angry. I didn't even know if she was dangerous. I just knew I didn't like how calm she was. I pulled into the lot and stopped near the pin. The lot was empty. No other cars, no people. The woman didn't move to get out. I forced a polite tone. "Okay, we're here." Silence. I glanced back. She was looking down now at her hands. She was holding something small, a phone, not just any phone, mine, my exact model, with my same cracked corner on the case. My breath caught. "What the—" She lifted it slightly so I could see the screen. On it was my lock screen photo, a photo I'd taken years ago, a photo of me and my sister at a beach, both of us squinting in the sun. I felt like the air in the car had thickened. "That's not— Where did you get that?" She spoke softly, like she was trying not to wake someone. "You leave pieces of yourself everywhere." My voice came out thin. "Get out of my car." She didn't move. Then she said, "Play the voicemail." I stared at my mounted phone, then down at the road ahead, then back at the empty lot. I shouldn't have. I know I shouldn't have. But my curiosity was like a hook in my chest, and fear does that thing where it convinces you that knowing more will make you safer. I tapped the voicemail, held the phone close, and pressed play. For a second there was only static. Then I heard my own voice, not speaking to anyone, just talking, low, like I was whispering to myself, and what I was saying was my address, my current address. Then I heard myself describe my front door, the deadbolt, the little scratch near the handle, the way the hallway light flickers sometimes. I felt sick. That's not... I never... The voicemail continued. My voice said very quietly, "If someone calls for me, don't put it through." My stomach dropped. I turned to the back seat. The woman was watching me now, eyes steady, expression almost gentle, like she was waiting for me to understand something. I whispered, "That's from the hotel?" She blinked slowly. Then she said, "It's all the same building, if you look at it right." My hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold my phone. I ended the ride in the app with trembling fingers, even though she hadn't gotten out. "I'm calling the police," I said. Her mouth twitched like she almost smiled. "About what?" I opened my mouth and realized I didn't have words. About a voicemail, about a woman with a phone case like mine, about a sentence from years ago in a hotel hallway. She leaned toward the door, finally, and her voice softened even more. "Check your back seat when you get home." Then she opened the door and stepped out. She didn't slam it. She closed it carefully. And then she walked into the darkness between the buildings where there were no lights. I sat there for a full minute, unable to move. When I finally drove away, I didn't go home. I drove to a gas station near the highway where the lights were bright, and there were cameras everywhere. I got out, opened the back door, and checked the seat. Nothing. No bag, no phone. Just a faint impression in the fabric, like someone had been sitting there for a long time. And on the floor mat, right behind the passenger seat, was a single white ankle sock with a small blue stripe near the cuff. I stared at it until my eyes watered. I didn't touch it. I walked back inside my car, locked the doors, and drove until the sky started to lighten at the edges. For weeks after that, I couldn't listen to voicemails, couldn't let my phone ring more than once, couldn't stand hearing my own recorded voice, because I kept thinking, what else do I say when I'm alone? What else do I do when I'm sure no one is watching? And who told me I was alone in the first place? After the rideshare night, I tried to change my habits. I stopped driving. I changed my phone number. I moved again. I even took a job that felt, on paper, safe. Daytime hours, familiar environment, people around. I worked as support staff at a school, not a teacher, more like the person who did a little of everything. Attendance calls, copy machine jams, lost and found piles, helping in the front office when things got busy. It was comforting, in a strange way, to be in a building that had rules, bells, schedules, locked doors, cameras in the hallways. And in the afternoons, when the last bell rang and the kids flooded out like a released breath, the building would empty slowly. The noises would fade. The teachers would leave. The lights would go off room by room. Sometimes I stayed late to finish paperwork or set up for events. One Thursday, we had a parent night, and afterward, I stayed to help the principal lock up. He left around 8:30, thanked me, and told me to make sure the side door was locked behind me when I left. By 9:15, I was alone. I remember because I looked at the clock above the office door, and the second hand made that loud tick you only hear when everything else is quiet. The building felt different at night, not spooky in a movie way, just hollow, like it wasn't meant to be without children, like the walls were used to absorbing noise and didn't know what to do with silence. I finished the last of my work, shut down the computer, and stood up to leave. That's when the intercom clicked. A little pop, followed by a faint hiss. I froze with my hand on the light switch. The intercom came on automatically in emergencies, fire drills, lockdowns, announcements. It wasn't supposed to activate when the office was closed. Then a voice came through the speaker. Not the principal's, not any teacher's, my own. I heard myself say calmly, "Please don't put me through." My blood went cold. I stared up at the speaker in the ceiling like it might be looking back at me. The intercom went silent again, leaving that faint hiss. I didn't move for a few seconds. My body felt heavy, like it was waiting for someone to tell it what to do next. Then I forced myself to laugh, quietly, like if I laughed, it would break the spell. "Okay," I muttered. "Okay, it's a glitch. Maybe someone had recorded a message accidentally. Maybe the system looped something weird. Maybe I was so stressed I was hearing things." But my voice, my exact voice, had come through that speaker. I grabbed my bag and walked fast down the hall toward the main entrance. The lights were on motion sensors, so they clicked on as I moved, creating this weird effect where the hallway lit up in chunks ahead of me and went dark behind me. I hated that. It made it feel like I was being ushered, like the building was guiding me out. As I passed the counselor's office, I saw something in the little window on the door, a shape, a person standing in the dark inside. I stopped. My heart hammered so hard it felt loud in my ears. I stepped closer to the window, peering in. The room was unlit, so the glass reflected the hallway behind me more than it showed the inside. For a moment all I saw was myself, my pale face, my wide eyes. Then the shape shifted, and I realized it wasn't inside the room. It was in the reflection, behind me. I spun around. The hallway was empty. The lights behind me stretched away into darkness, each one buzzing softly. I stood there, breathing hard, trying to understand what I'd seen. Then somewhere down the hall, a door clicked. Not slammed, not rattled, just clicked, like a latch being tested. I started walking again, faster. My footsteps sounded too loud, too crisp on the tile. As I neared the main doors, my phone buzzed in my pocket, a voicemail from my own number. I didn't stop walking. I didn't even look. I just shoved the phone deeper into my pocket like it was hot. The exit doors were locked, as they should be at night, but my key fob worked. I pressed it. Nothing. I pressed it again. The little light on the fob blinked red. Wrong. My hands shook. I tried again. Red. I looked down at the fob, then at the doors, then back at the fob like looking would change it. I'd used it that morning. It worked. Now it didn't. Behind me, the intercom clicked again. Pop. Hiss. Then my voice came through once more, softer this time, almost conversational. "I can't help you." My throat closed. That was what I'd said to the caller at the hotel. I hadn't thought about those exact words in years. But here they were, floating above a school hallway at night, in my own voice. I turned slowly, staring down the corridor. Nothing moved. No footsteps. No silhouettes. Just empty hallway and buzzing lights and dark doorways. I whispered, "Who is there?" No answer. Then very quietly, from somewhere far down the hall, I heard 3 taps. Pause. 3 taps. My skin prickled so hard it felt like my body was trying to climb out of itself. I didn't think anymore. I just acted. I ran to the side door near the gym, the one with the push bar. I slammed my palm on it. It opened. Cold night air hit my face like a slap. I stumbled outside, and didn't stop running until I reached my car. I locked myself in and sat there, shaking, staring at the dark school building. Nothing in the windows, no movement, just a big, silent shape. When I finally looked at my phone, there were 3 voicemails. I didn't listen. I deleted them. Then I drove home and sat on my couch with all the lights on until sunrise. The next day, I went back to the school in daylight and asked the IT guy about the intercom system. He frowned. "It doesn't even have recording capability," he said. "It's one way. You press the button. You talk live." "Then how?" I started. He cut me off with a shrug. "Maybe you heard something else. The speakers pop sometimes." I tried to explain the exact words, my exact voice. He smiled in that tired way people do when they're humoring you. "You've been working too hard." I nodded like I accepted that. But on my lunch break, I went to the counselor's office. I stood by the door window and looked in. The room was empty. No person, no shape. On the counselor's desk, though, was a small cardboard box, open. Inside were things from the lost and found, and right on top, perfectly placed, was a single white ankle sock with a small blue stripe. I stared at it until my eyes burned. Then I walked away without touching it, because the worst part wasn't the sock. It was the feeling that something was leaving breadcrumbs for me, calm and patient, like it didn't matter how many times I ran, like it already knew where I would end up. When people say home invasion, you picture broken windows, footprints, a smashed lock. What happened to me wasn't like that. It was more polite, like someone wanted to be invited. My aunt died and left me her house. We weren't especially close, but she didn't have kids, and I guess, on paper, I was the closest thing she had to family who wasn't going to sell everything instantly. The house was a small place in a quiet town, 1 story, a little porch, a backyard with a chain-link fence and an old shed. When I first walked through it with the realtor, it smelled like dust and lavender. My aunt had always kept those little sachets in drawers and closets. It felt sad, but safe. I decided to stay there for a while. Work remotely, clear out her things slowly, maybe fix it up and keep it. The first night I slept there, I woke up at 3:12 a.m. for no reason. That happens when you're in a new place. New creaks, new settling sounds, unfamiliar quiet. I lay there listening. The house was very still. Then I heard something faint, like fabric sliding against fabric, not from outside, from inside. I held my breath. It came again, a soft shh sound, like someone brushing past a curtain. I sat up, heart thudding. The bedroom door was closed. I stared at it for a long time, waiting for the handle to turn. It didn't. Eventually, I convinced myself it was the house settling, the HVAC. Something shifting. I lay back down and forced my eyes shut. In the morning, I found the living room curtains slightly open. I knew I'd closed them the night before. I was sure, because I'd done it deliberately, feeling like my aunt would have wanted them closed at night. Still, it was a small thing, easy to doubt. I spent the day cleaning, going through drawers, throwing out expired food, folding old linens. In the hallway closet, I found a shoebox with my aunt's handwriting on it. Inside was a stack of notes, not letters, not journals, just scraps of paper with short, blunt sentences. "There's a draft in the hall. Lock the back door. Even if you're home, don't answer the phone after midnight. Check the windows before bed." At first I thought she'd written reminders for herself, anxiety habits, little rules. Then I found one that made my stomach turn. "If someone calls for me, don't put it through." I sat on the floor with that note in my hand, feeling suddenly cold. It was my handwriting, not my aunt's. My handwriting, same slant, same way I looped my P. Same slight tremble in long lines. I stared at it, trying to find a logical explanation. Had I written it? When? Why? I'd never seen it before. My hands shook as I flipped through the stack. More notes, in the same handwriting. My phone number is not safe. Don't trust what you remember. You leave pieces of yourself everywhere. I dropped the papers like they'd bitten me. I stood up too fast and had to steady myself against the closet wall. My mind tried to reject it, to label it a coincidence, a prank, some weird inheritance game. But the more I looked, the more it felt like someone had been collecting my words, my thoughts, my phrases, and storing them in a dead woman's closet like they belonged there. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the living room with the lights on, TV playing softly, trying to make the house feel occupied. Around 1:30 a.m., the landline rang. My aunt still had a landline. I hadn't unplugged it yet. The ring was old-fashioned and harsh. I stared at the phone, frozen. It rang again, then again. I didn't pick it up. I remembered the note, "Don't answer the phone after midnight." The ringing stopped. Silence settled. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Then the answering machine clicked on. I'd forgotten it existed. A beep, and then my own voice, low and calm, speaking into the machine. Not the caller's voice. Mine. "I'm not here," my voice said. "Tell them I'm not here." My mouth went dry. The machine beeped again, waiting for the message. There was no other voice, just my voice, already recorded, already placed there. I walked to the phone slowly, like approaching something dangerous but fragile. My finger hovered over the button to play the message back. Then I stopped, because suddenly I understood what had been happening. It wasn't just that someone was watching me. It was that someone was building a version of me, piece by piece, using my own words. A version that could speak when I didn't. A version that could leave messages in rooms I'd never been in. A version that could exist in places I'd only passed through, like a shadow that got more solid every time I looked away. I unplugged the phone, hands shaking, and carried it into the kitchen like removing a poisonous animal. Then I went back to the hallway closet and stared at the box of notes. I didn't want to touch them again, but I did. I pulled them out and spread them on the floor, reading through, searching for something, anything, that told me what to do. Near the bottom of the stack, I found one last note. Short, simple. Check the back seat when you get home. I stared at it for a long time. Then I walked outside to my car. The porch light buzzed. The yard was quiet. The town around me felt asleep. I unlocked the car, opened the back door, and leaned in. At first I saw nothing. Then I noticed the seatbelt was buckled. The back seat belt. I never buckled it. No one had been in my car since I drove in. My breath caught. I reached out and touched the belt. It was warm, like someone had just been sitting there. I stumbled back, heart pounding, and looked around the dark yard. Nothing. No footsteps, no movement, just quiet. I slammed the car door shut and ran back inside, locking the deadbolt so hard the knob rattled. I didn't stay in that house much longer. I told myself it was because I wasn't ready to deal with grief, because the house was too much work, because it made me sad. But the truth is, I couldn't stand the feeling that the house knew me. Not in a supernatural way, in a human way, like someone had been there, learning me, practicing me, shaping me into something that fit between its walls. I sold it. I left the town, and I told myself I'd never go back. But sometimes, when I'm driving at night and I see my reflection in the rearview mirror, I wonder if I'm the one who left, or if I'm the one who stayed behind in pieces. After all of that, I did something that seems, looking back, completely backwards. I started making sleep content online. I know how that sounds, but it was comforting, at first. Talking softly into a microphone in my own room, with my own lights, controlling the sound, controlling the pacing, creating a space where silence wasn't threatening. It was intentional. People would comment that my voice helped them sleep, that it made them feel less alone, that they liked the calm stories, the gentle confessional tone. It felt good to be useful, and it felt good to be heard on my own terms. I didn't monetize. I didn't want ads. I didn't want anything loud interrupting the mood. It was just me, late at night, speaking quietly, and strangers listening in their own rooms. For a while, it felt safe. Then the emails started. Nothing dramatic at first, just normal messages. Love your videos. Your voice is so calming. Can you talk about rainy nights? I'd skim them and smile and move on. Then one night I got an email with no subject line. The body of it was one sentence. You should write things down. It helps. My stomach tightened. I stared at the words for a long time. I hadn't said that in a video. I hadn't posted it anywhere. That was what the neighbor had said in the hallway, back in the apartment building. I didn't reply. I tried to delete it and forget it, but I couldn't, because the next night, under my newest video, a comment appeared. No username, just a string of letters and numbers. The comment said, "Busy day." I felt cold. I scrolled through the rest of the comments. Normal stuff. Heart emojis. Good night from Canada. Watching from the Philippines. This helps my anxiety. Then I saw another comment from the same strange account. Did you lose something? My hands started to shake. I clicked the account. No videos, no profile picture, no subscriptions visible, just a blank shell. I tried to tell myself it was coincidence, that those were common phrases, that I was being paranoid, but then the account posted one more comment. 3 words. Check the back seat. I sat back from my screen, heart hammering. My room felt different suddenly, smaller, like the walls had moved in. I turned my head slowly and looked at my bedroom door. Closed. Normal. I listened. Silence. I told myself to breathe. I got up, checked the locks, checked the windows, checked the closet like an adult who knows better, but can't stop. Nothing. I went back to my desk, sat down, and refreshed the page. A new comment appeared. If someone calls for me, don't put it through. I stared at it until the letters blurred. My throat went tight, because that wasn't just a phrase. That was a trail that had followed me from hotel to apartment, to car, to school, to house, to this room, right here, right now. I deleted the comment. Then I deleted the video. Then I sat there in the blue light of my monitor, feeling like a child who'd turned off the lamp and realized the dark was still there. My phone rang. Unknown number. One ring, I didn't answer. It rang again. I didn't answer. It stopped. Then immediately a voicemail appeared, from my own number. I stared at it, pulse roaring in my ears. I didn't press play. I couldn't. Instead, I opened my email. Another message had arrived. No subject. The body of it was longer this time. It said, "Hello. Welcome. A lot of people watch this to fall asleep." There are no ADs because the channel is not monetized. Ask them to subscribe. Ask them where they're watching from. I felt like I couldn't breathe. Those were the exact lines I'd been planning to say in my next video. I hadn't written them anywhere yet. I'd just thought them. That was the worst moment for me. Not the hotel, not the sock, not the school intercom, because it meant something simple and horrifying. It wasn't only collecting my past, it was listening to my future. I sat very still, hands cold, and tried to think logically. If someone was in my accounts, they could see drafts. If someone had access to my email, they could see messages. If someone had hacked my phone. But none of that explained why the words felt like they'd come from inside my head. I got up and turned off my computer. Then I turned off my phone. Then I stood in the middle of my room in complete silence, listening. At first, all I heard was my own breathing. Then, faintly, I heard a tapping sound. 3 taps. Pause. 3 taps. It wasn't coming from the door. It wasn't coming from the window. It was coming from inside the wall, behind the headboard, like someone on the other side of the drywall was tapping with a fingernail, patient and precise. I backed away from the bed slowly, my skin prickling. The tapping continued. 3. Pause. 3. Like a code. Like a habit. Like someone saying, "I'm here," without using words. I didn't sleep in that room again. I slept on a friend's couch for a week, telling them I had anxiety stuff and needed company. I didn't mention the tapping. I didn't mention the emails. I didn't mention the sock, because when you string it all together, it sounds insane. And yet, even now when I record anything, voice notes, a quick memo, a message to someone, I listen to it back, and I'm not listening for mistakes. I'm listening for something else. A second voice, a breath that isn't mine, a pause in the wrong place, a version of me that learned how to speak when I wasn't paying attention. And the thing is, sometimes I can't tell. Sometimes my voice sounds unfamiliar in a way that makes my stomach turn, like I'm hearing myself from the other side of a wall. I don't know who that person is. I don't know how long they've been practicing. I only know that the quieter my life becomes, the easier it is to hear them. And the hardest part is this. Once you start noticing the small wrong things, you can't stop. You can move. You can change your number. You can delete your videos. You can unplug your phone. But you can't uninstall your own memory. You can't lock your own thoughts behind a deadbolt. And if someone has been collecting you, your words, your habits, your little phrases, patiently, politely, over years, how do you prove you're still the original? It was my apartment. Not a new city, sketchy neighborhood apartment either. It was the kind of building you brag about to your parents so they stop worrying. Key fob entry, cameras in the lobby, a front desk that pretended it recognized you even if it didn't. I'd lived there long enough to memorize the building's sounds. The elevator's little sigh when it stopped. The soft thump of the trash chute door down the hall. The way my upstairs neighbor's footsteps sounded like someone sorting coins in a jar. I slept well there, really well. Until I didn't. It started with something stupid. My toothpaste cap. I'm the kind of person who's a little obsessed with small systems. Keys always in the same bowl. Shoes pointed the same way. Toothpaste cap screwed on tight because I hate crusty toothpaste rings. One night I brushed my teeth, tightened the cap, and went to bed. The next morning, the cap was sitting next to the tube. Not off in the sink like I'd dropped it. Not loose like I'd been lazy. It was placed, clean, almost aligned with the tube like someone had set it down and then thought, no, more to the left, and adjusted it. I stared at it longer than I want to admit, then laughed at myself. People misremember. People do things on autopilot. People wake up, move around, and forget. I screwed the cap on, tighter than I needed to, and went to work. That same day, I came home to find my throw blanket on the couch, folded differently. Still folded, still neat, just not mine. I sat on the edge of the coffee table like I'd walked into someone else's living room, and I didn't want to touch anything, like skin oils would ruin the evidence. I kept looking for a more normal explanation. Maybe the cleaner had come. But I didn't have a cleaner. The building offered a service, but you had to schedule it, and I hadn't. I checked my front door. No scratches. Deadbolt fine. Chain intact. I checked the window locks, even though I lived on the 6th floor, and I never opened the windows more than a crack. Everything was normal. That night I set a trap that makes me cringe now because it feels like something you see in an old movie. I put a thin strip of clear tape across the inside edge of my door, low enough that I could see it, high enough that it wouldn't catch on the threshold. Not a serious trap, just a way to tell myself I wasn't imagining it. In the morning the tape was broken, not ripped off, not peeled clean. It was torn in the middle like someone had opened the door and closed it again, and the tape had stretched and snapped. I remember the cold feeling that went through me. Wasn't like panic. It wasn't dramatic. It was this flat, heavy disbelief, like my body had decided it didn't have the energy for fear yet, so it gave me nausea instead. I called the front desk. I told them, careful, polite, I think someone might have tried my door last night. The guy at the desk said, "We didn't see anything on the cameras." I said, "Can you check?" He said, "We did." Nothing came up. Like he was reading from a laminated card. I asked if anyone had used a master key. He laughed just once, like I'd told a joke without meaning to. Maintenance can access units for emergencies, but they'd leave a note. You'd know. That was the moment I realized something else. The building's safety features were also privacy features for the building. The cameras weren't there to protect me. They were there to protect the property. If the cameras showed nothing, then the building had nothing to deal with. I went upstairs and walked through my apartment slowly, like I was a guest. The air smelled normal. The furniture sat the way it always did. But I started noticing tiny differences that were so small they felt insane to describe. My dish sponge was on the right side of the sink instead of the left. My shower curtain, one of those cheap plastic liners, was hooked through the rings differently, like someone had pulled it down and put it back up without caring about the order. One of my books on the shelf was pushed in farther than the others. I stood in front of the bookshelf and tried to remember if I'd touched it. I couldn't. Not because I hadn't. Because I couldn't remember the last week clearly enough to swear to anything. That's the part people don't understand until it happens. You think your memory is a recording. It isn't. It's a story you tell yourself. And if someone edits the set dressing while you're not looking, your brain will try to patch it. Your brain hates admitting uncertainty. It would rather make you feel stupid than make you feel unsafe. So I tried to be rational. I changed my locks. I didn't tell the building. I hired a locksmith and paid more than I could afford. New deadbolt, new knob, new keys. I carried them like they were medicine. 2 nights later, my bathroom mirror had a smear on it, just a faint streak, like someone had wiped away steam with the side of their hand. Except I hadn't showered yet. The mirror was dry. The streak was dry. It looked older than the last hour. It looked like it had been waiting. I pulled my phone out and took a picture, because I'd started needing proof even for myself. Then I stood in my living room with my back against the wall and listened. I heard nothing, but I couldn't stop imagining sound. I couldn't stop imagining the building itself. Hallways, vents, utility closets, maintenance access panels. I started seeing my apartment as a place with hidden roots, like the inside of a body. That night I didn't sleep. I sat on the couch with the lights off because I didn't want anyone outside to see I was awake, and I watched the reflection of my front door in my dark TV screen. I kept my keys in my fist, like a child holds a lucky charm. Around 3:10 a.m., the doorknob moved. Not violently, not a jiggle, a careful testing turn, like someone checking whether it was locked. I froze so hard my hands went numb. My throat closed like I'd swallowed cotton. The deadbolt held. The knob returned to center. And then, what I can only describe as patience, there was another slow turn, like the person on the other side was confirming the deadbolt was real and not a mistake. Then nothing. No footsteps retreating down the hall, no elevator ding, no hallway door opening, just nothing. I waited a long time before I moved. When I did, I crept to the door and put my ear against it. I could hear the buildings hum, the distant rush of water in someone else's pipes, the tiny click of the thermostat behind me. But no breathing, no shifting weight. I called the police. When they arrived, they were kind in that tired way. They checked the hall. They checked the stairwell. They asked if I had enemies, an ex, anyone who had a reason to scare me. I could tell they wanted a story that made sense. I didn't have one. The next day, I asked the building manager for a list of keycard entries on my floor. She said they couldn't provide that for privacy reasons. I asked if they'd at least tell me if anyone's keycard was used near my door around 3 a.m. She smiled like she was dealing with a difficult tenant and said, "Our systems don't track that level of detail." I asked about the cameras again. She said, "Sometimes cameras glitch." I went back to my apartment and sat down on the kitchen floor because I couldn't think of anywhere else to put my body. And that's when I noticed the vent above my stove. It wasn't loose, it wasn't hanging, it was just slightly misaligned, like someone had taken it down and put it back up without tightening one corner properly. The screw heads were scuffed, tiny silver half-moons where a screwdriver had slipped. I stood on a chair and pressed my fingertips to the metal. It shifted. I took it down and held it in my hands. The air that came out of the duct smelled like dust and warm drywall. I shined my phone flashlight up into it and saw nothing at first, just darkness. Then farther back, a piece of black fabric caught on a seam, like a glove or a sleeve, something that didn't belong in the guts of a building. My stomach rolled so hard I thought I might throw up. I didn't reach in. I didn't touch it. I put the vent cover back, stepped down, and locked my front door even though I was inside. That was the first time I considered something I hadn't wanted to consider, that someone wasn't coming in through my door at all. That night, I left. I packed a bag like I was going on a normal trip. I unplugged my laptop like I'd be back in a couple days. I took my passport and my hard drive and the little envelope with my birth certificate because it was suddenly important to me that no one else touch anything that had my name on it. I stayed with a friend across town. I didn't tell her why. I told her my building was doing maintenance. I heard myself say it and realized how easily lies come when the truth feels too strange to say out loud. The next morning, I went back with her. I didn't want to be alone in my apartment again, not even for 5 minutes. She stood in the doorway while I walked through the rooms. I acted casual, like I was proving to both of us that I was fine. And then we saw it together. My kitchen drawer, the one with the utensils, was open an inch. I hadn't left it like that. I never left it like that. My friend said, maybe it didn't close all the way. I walked over and pulled it open. At the back, under the utensil tray, was a single Polaroid photograph. I don't even know where you buy Polaroid film anymore, which is part of why it didn't feel real. The photo was of me sleeping, not a blurry, far-away shot, not a creepy zoom from across the street. It was taken from inside my bedroom, close enough that I could see the relaxed parting of my lips, the indentation of my cheek in the pillow, close enough that I could see the relaxed parting of my lips, the indentation of my cheek in the pillow, close enough that whoever took it could have reached out and touched my hair. My friend made a sound like she'd been punched. I didn't make any sound at all. On the white border of the photo, in careful handwriting, it said, "You look rested when you don't worry." I sat down on the bed, my bed, the one in the photo, and I couldn't stop thinking about how calm the sentence sounded. Not angry, not threatening, almost instructive, like advice, like someone thought they were helping. I moved out within a week. I broke my lease. I lost money. I didn't care. The building manager acted offended when I told her. She said, "We've never had an incident like that." I didn't show her the photo. I didn't want her to touch it. I didn't want her to tell me it was fake, or suggest I'd staged it. I didn't want her to turn my fear into a tenant dispute. I threw most of my things away. And still, sometimes when I'm brushing my teeth at night, I find myself tightening the cap and then staring at my own reflection, trying to remember if I did it, and realizing how easy it would be for my memory to be softened around the edges, how easy it would be for my brain to choose comfort over accuracy. I want to tell you that was the end of it, that I'm just a person with a story about a bad apartment. But a couple months after I moved, I got an email from an address I didn't recognize. No subject line, just a sentence in the body. "You sleep lighter now." Good. I didn't reply. I didn't tell anyone. I deleted it, emptied the trash, and then sat in the dark with my phone face down because it felt like an eye. And that was when I learned a second thing about quiet fear. Sometimes it doesn't come from what happens. It comes from the idea that someone is still watching how you change. A few years later, I was working a job that made me feel lucky just to have it. The kind of job where you say yes too quickly because you're afraid the offer will disappear. Small office, old building, cheap rent, which meant thin walls and a weird layout, like the space had been divided and redivided until it didn't remember what it used to be. I was the last one hired, the lowest rung, so I ended up with the desk that didn't quite fit anywhere else. It faced the back hallway, a narrow corridor that led to storage closets and the break room, and at the very end, a door that was always locked. Nobody talked about that door. It just existed, like a piece of scenery. The first week I worked there, I noticed the lights in the back hallway sometimes flickered. Not a horror movie flicker, a normal old building kind of stutter. I told myself it wasn't worth mentioning because I was new, and new people who mention things are new people who get noticed. Then one afternoon I was alone at my desk. It was late. Most of the office had left. I was finishing something because I wanted to look dependable. I heard the locked door at the end of the hallway click. I looked up. It didn't open. There was just a click, like a latch settling. Then silence again. I stared at the door for a long time. It didn't move. Nothing else happened. After a while I went back to my screen, feeling slightly embarrassed at myself, like I'd gotten spooked by a radiator. 2 days later I came in early, before anyone else. I was proud of myself for being the kind of person who arrived early. I unlocked the office door, turned on the lights, and walked to my desk. On my keyboard was a post-it note. I assumed it was a message from someone. That's normal in offices. Call me when you get in. Can you print this? Happy birthday. This post-it said, "You're early today." That was all. No name, no initials, nothing. My first thought was that someone was messing with me, like a harmless prank. Maybe the owner, trying to be funny. So I looked around and smiled, as if someone might be watching, because it felt better to act amused than unsettled. No one was there. I checked the door. It was still locked behind me. The alarm hadn't gone off. I sat down slowly and touched the post-it with one finger, like it might leave something on my skin. That day, I asked around casually, "Hey, did anyone leave a note on my desk?" People shrugged. One woman laughed and said, "Welcome to the team." Like everything in the office was a hazing ritual. The boss said, "Probably just someone reminding you we appreciate your work." But his tone didn't match the sentence. It was too smooth. The notes kept coming. Small observations, always true. You drink too much coffee after 2. You pick your cuticles when you think. You look at the hallway when it's quiet. Once I found one folded inside my notebook, between pages I hadn't opened that day. Once I found one tucked under my mouse pad, which meant someone had lifted my hand's usual resting place and put it back, without shifting anything else. The scariest part was how ordinary they looked. Cheap yellow paper, normal handwriting, no angry slashes, no shaky strokes, just neat, patient, familiar handwriting. I started arriving at different times, thinking it would catch whoever it was off guard. The notes adjusted. "You're late today. You left early yesterday. You're trying to catch me." That one made my mouth go dry. It wasn't threatening. It was conversational, like we'd agreed to a game. I told myself to stop being dramatic and just report it. So I went to my boss and said, "Someone keeps leaving notes on my desk. It's making me uncomfortable." He leaned back in his chair and gave me a look that felt like disappointment wrapped in politeness. "It's probably someone trying to motivate you," he said. "You know how people are." I said, "They're watching me." He said, "We're all watching each other. It's an office." Then he smiled, and in that smile, I felt something I couldn't name at first. Not cruelty, not malice, ownership. I went back to my desk and tried to work, but my attention kept slipping to the hallway. That locked door at the end of it seemed closer now, like the corridor had shortened. I decided to do something that I'm not proud of. I stayed late on purpose. I waited until everyone left, until the office was quiet enough that the air conditioner sounded like breathing. I turned off my monitor and sat very still. I watched the hallway. Time started to feel thick, My eyes strained for movement. My mind filled the silence with imagined footsteps, imagined door handles turning, imagined someone standing just out of view. Then, at around 8:40, I heard it. A soft sound. Not the click this time. A scrape, like metal on metal, but careful. The locked door at the end of the hallway opened, not wide, just enough for a sliver of darkness to appear. My heart didn't race. It sank. I couldn't see anyone, because the light in the hallway didn't reach inside that room. The door opened a little more, and I saw a thin line of pale wall inside, and then the edge of a filing cabinet, like the room was an office, too. A hand appeared on the doorframe. Just fingers at first. Long fingers, clean nails. Then the hand withdrew. The door stayed open for a second longer, as if whoever was inside was listening to see if I'd react. I didn't move. I barely breathed. I didn't want to give my position away, even though my desk was directly facing the hallway like a stage. The door closed again, softly. The latch clicked, and then, after a pause, I heard the break room refrigerator hum shift, like the power load changed, like something had turned on in that room. I sat there until I felt sick. Then I stood up and walked out of the office without turning off the lights, without locking my computer, without grabbing my bag. I just walked, because my body had decided that whatever was happening, my survival depended on leaving before curiosity could talk me into staying. The next morning there was a note on my chair. "You left without your bag." I went straight to my boss and said, "I'm done. I'm leaving. Today." He looked annoyed, like I'd asked for vacation during a busy week. "You can't just quit," he said. I said, "Watch me." He leaned forward, lowered his voice, and said, "Do you know what's in that back room?" I didn't answer. He smiled without humor. "It's old files, sensitive stuff, records. That door stays locked for a reason." I said, "Then why does it open at night?" His eyes flicked to the hallway, just for a second. A tiny, involuntary movement. And then he looked back at me and said, "Because someone has to keep track." Keep track. Like I was inventory, like I was a file. I quit anyway. I left. I blocked numbers. I stopped updating my LinkedIn for a while, because it felt like a way for strangers to map my life. Months later, I ran into a former coworker at a grocery store. We did the polite chat. The weather, the price of eggs, the usual. Then she said casually, "Oh, did you hear? They got in trouble. Some kind of complaint." My throat tightened. "What kind of complaint?" She lowered her voice like she was sharing gossip, not something that still lived in my muscles. "They said there was a camera, like, not disclosed, in the back hallway." I felt my face go cold. "Where?" She shrugged. "I don't know. Somewhere above the drop ceiling. They said it was pointed right at your desk." I thought about the notes again, about how they always knew, about how the handwriting had felt familiar. And then I remembered something I hadn't paid attention to at the time. My boss's handwriting on memos, on meeting notes. Neat, patient, familiar. I stood in the cereal aisle and realized the horror wasn't that someone had been watching. It was that they'd wanted me to know. Because the watching wasn't the secret. The secret was the control. After that job, I tried to choose a life that was quieter, smaller, predictable. I started doing contract work from home, and I told myself it was for peace of mind. But part of it was that I liked controlling my environment. I liked that nobody could casually access my desk, because my desk was my kitchen table. I bought a little house in a neighborhood where people waved at each other and complained about lawn care. I learned the names of the neighbors' dogs before I learned the neighbors' names. I started leaving my porch light on, not out of fear, but out of habit. The first time something felt off, it was my mailbox. I'd gone out to get my mail and found a letter without a stamp. No postmark. Just my name and address, written in block letters. Inside was a single sheet of paper. It said, "I think we've met before." No signature. I stood on my porch with the letter in my hand and listened to the neighborhood. A lawnmower somewhere, a kid laughing, a car door closing, normal sounds that suddenly felt like camouflage. I tried to reason it out. Wrong mailbox. Prank. Someone bored. Someone drunk. But that night, when I checked my front door lock, I found a tiny scratch near the keyhole that hadn't been there before. Not the kind of scratch you get from normal use. This was a small crescent, like a tool had slipped. I bought a doorbell camera the next day. I installed it myself and felt proud, like I was taking my safety into my own hands. The camera worked. It recorded squirrels. It recorded delivery drivers. It recorded me leaving with trash bags and coming back with groceries. It didn't record the thing I needed it to record, because whoever was doing this knew how to stand just out of its view. I learned that slowly, over weeks. I'd check the footage in the morning and see nothing, and then I'd open my front door and find something that proved someone had been there. A pebble placed on my doormat, centered like a decoration, a dandelion stem tucked into the corner of the door frame. Once, a small piece of blue painter's tape stuck to the inside edge of my storm door. Little markers, like someone was testing whether I noticed. I stopped sleeping deeply. I started waking at every creak of the house settling. I'd lie there and listen to the silence the way you listen for a distant siren, waiting for it to come closer. One night, around 2 a.m., I heard my porch steps creak, just once. Then again, softer. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. My bedroom window faced the front yard. The curtains were drawn, but not tightly. If I shifted, even slightly, I could peek out. I didn't, because I didn't want whoever was out there to see the movement. I didn't want them to know I was awake. The steps creaked again, and then I heard something that made my skin prickle. A faint tapping, like fingertips on glass, not pounding, not urgent, just a patient little rhythm. I lay there, eyes open, and thought about how close the porch window was to where I slept. I thought about the thinness of glass, the ease of it. The tapping stopped. Then very softly, I heard my mailbox lid lift and close. Metal on metal. A pause. Then the porch steps creaked again, retreating. In the morning there was another letter. No stamp, no postmark. Inside, a single sentence. You don't look out the window anymore. I sat at my kitchen table and stared at that line until my coffee went cold. It wasn't just that they were watching my house. They were watching my choices, my fear. They were tracking the ways I'd changed to accommodate them, like a scientist observing an animal in a cage. I called the police. A different set of tired, kind eyes. A different clipboard. They asked if I had enemies, an ex, anyone who might be harassing me. I said, I don't know. They said gently, do you have cameras? I showed them the doorbell footage. Normal. Boring. Harmless. They looked relieved, because boring footage means less work, less danger, less paperwork. They said, could be kids. I held up the letter. Kids don't write like this." The officer shrugged like he didn't want to argue with someone who looked like she hadn't slept. "If you see anyone, call." He left. The neighborhood returned to normal, but my house didn't feel like my house anymore. It felt like a stage set someone else had access to. I started looking for patterns. The letters came every few days, always at night, always without being caught on camera. Sometimes they were left in the mailbox. Sometimes they were tucked under the welcome mat. Once one was taped to my porch railing, on the side facing the street, where anyone could see it, except it was placed low enough that most people wouldn't, like it was meant for me. I tried changing the camera angle. I tried adding a second camera. Whoever it was adjusted too. They stayed in blind spots with a skill that didn't feel like a bored teenager. Then one evening, I came home to find my side gate unlatched. The gate was old wood, painted white, leading into the backyard. I never used it. It stuck if you didn't lift it just right. But I always latched it because it was a habit, like toothpaste caps. I stood there with my hand on the gate and looked down the narrow path into my backyard. The grass was a little overgrown. The shed sat at the far end. The windows of the house looked dark and reflective, like eyes that didn't belong to me. I didn't go in. I went back to my car, sat in it, with the doors locked, and called a friend. I asked him to come over. I didn't tell him why. I just said I needed someone. When he arrived, he tried to make it light. "You good?" he said, like I'd just had a bad day. I led him to the side gate. He saw it and frowned. "You leave it open?" "No." He stepped through the gate, and I followed, staying close enough that if something happened, I wouldn't be alone. We walked toward the shed. Halfway there, my friend stopped. "What?" I whispered. He pointed to the grass near the back door. There were footprints, not deep, not muddy, just the faint flattening of blades, like someone had walked there recently. The path led from the gate to the back door, and then away again, back toward the shed. My friend said, "Maybe an animal." I looked at the shape, the spacing, the deliberate straight line. "Animals wander," I said. My voice sounded strange, like it belonged to someone else. "They don't walk like they're trying not to be seen." We reached the shed. The padlock was still on it, but the lock had a fresh scratch on it, a bright silver line. My friend touched it and said, "Someone tried it." Then he looked at me, really looked, and something in his face shifted from casual to serious. "Do you want to stay somewhere else tonight?" he asked. I nodded. I didn't trust my voice. As we walked back toward the house, I noticed something else. My back door's blinds were tilted, just slightly, a sliver of view into my kitchen. I hadn't left them like that. Someone had been inside my backyard, right up against my house, close enough to peer in. And then I remembered the letter. "You don't look out the window anymore." Maybe they weren't watching me through the window. Maybe they were watching me through the house. I didn't sleep there that night, or the next. When I finally went back in daylight, with my friend again, we found nothing obvious. No broken windows, no forced doors. But in my bedroom closet, behind my hanging clothes, there was another letter. It wasn't in the mailbox. It wasn't on the porch. It was inside. I sat down on the carpet and held it like it might bite. It said, "You moved like I thought you would." That was the sentence that made me understand. It didn't matter if I installed cameras. It didn't matter if I changed locks. It didn't matter if I called police. The point wasn't to get in. The point was to be able to predict me, to know my next move before I did. I sold the house. I told people it was because I didn't like the commute. I told people it was because the neighborhood wasn't my vibe. I told people anything except the truth, because the truth makes people look at you like you're either exaggerating or inviting pity. I moved into an apartment in a different city and tried to become harder to map. For a while it worked. Then on a rainy Tuesday I got a letter at my new address. This one had a stamp. This one had a postmark. This one said, "We have, in fact, met before." And the postmark was from my old town. I didn't open my curtains for weeks after that. Not because I thought I'd see someone, but because I couldn't stop thinking about how long it takes, sometimes, for the past to catch up with you. I used to take ride shares all the time. I liked the small anonymity of it. You get in a stranger's car, you become a temporary version of yourself, and then you step out and disappear again. It felt modern and simple, until one night it didn't. It was late, and I was leaving a friend's place across town. I'd had one drink, not enough to be careless, just enough to make the world feel slightly softer around the edges. I ordered a ride. The app showed a car, a name, a license plate. When the car arrived, it matched. Same make, same color, plate correct. Driver name matched the app. I got in. The car smelled faintly like laundry detergent. Clean, too clean. The driver didn't talk much. That wasn't unusual. I liked quiet drivers. I stared out the window and watched streetlights slide across the glass. A couple of minutes into the trip, my phone buzzed. It was the app. "Your driver has arrived." I looked at the message, confused, because I was already in the car. Then another notification. "We noticed your trip hasn't started. Are you in the correct vehicle?" My stomach dropped, slow and heavy. I glanced at the driver's phone mounted on the dashboard. The screen was dark. No map, no route. He was driving anyway, smoothly, like he knew where he was going. I said lightly, trying to keep my voice normal, "Hey, I think the app is glitching. It says the trip hasn't started." He didn't look at me. "It'll start," he said. I watched the streets outside. They looked familiar, but not quite, like we were taking small turns that weren't on the normal route. I checked the app again. It still showed my driver sitting at the pickup point, waiting. My real driver. This man wasn't him. I felt the urge to jump out of the car immediately, but we weren't stopped. We were moving, and the doors were locked in that automatic way modern cars do. I said, trying to keep my voice from shaking, "Can you pull over? I think I left something." He said, "We're almost there." Almost where? My heart was pounding now, but I forced myself to breathe slowly. I didn't want to sound panicked. Panic can turn a situation into a decision point for someone else. I looked for landmarks, a gas station, a store, a place with lights and people. We passed them. We kept going. The driver's hands were steady on the wheel. His posture was relaxed. He wasn't frantic. He wasn't aggressive. He drove like someone running an errand. That calmness was the worst part. I said, "I'm going to call my friend." I didn't ask permission. I just lifted my phone. He said softly, "Don't." Just that. Don't. Not angry, not loud, like a reminder. I turned my phone screen toward myself and pretended to tap. But I was doing something else. I was holding down the emergency feature, the one that starts calling if you keep pressing. My fingers were slippery with sweat. I kept my face blank. The driver glanced at me for the first time in the rearview mirror. His eyes met mine briefly, and I felt a sharp, strange humiliation, like I was a child caught lying. He said, "You can relax, you're safe." Nobody says that unless they're trying to convince you of the opposite. The app buzzed again. My actual driver messaged, "I'm here." My throat tightened. I typed with shaking fingers, "I'm in wrong car. Call police." I didn't know if it would send. I didn't know if he'd see it. But I hit send anyway. The driver took a turn into a quieter street. Houses, dark lawns, a place where nobody would see a car slow down. I forced my mind to work like a tool. What do I have? What can I do? My keys, my phone, the seatbelt, the door handle, the window. I tried the door handle casually, like I was adjusting myself. It didn't open. Child lock. I looked at the driver's door. He could open his. He had control. I said very quietly, "Let me out." He sighed, like I was being difficult. Not yet. Something in me shifted then. Not bravery, not confidence, just a blunt understanding that waiting was the worst option. I did something reckless. I unbuckled my seatbelt and leaned forward, fast, and grabbed the steering wheel with both hands. I didn't yank it hard enough to crash. I wasn't trying to die. I just jerked it enough to make the car wobble. The driver swore, his first real emotion, and grabbed the wheel back, fighting me. The car swerved toward the curb. I shouted loud, "Help! Let me out!" The driver slammed the brakes. The car stopped, hard enough that my shoulder hit the seat in front of me. For a second, everything was still. Then the driver turned his head slightly and said, low and cold, "Why did you do that?" Not a question, an accusation. I didn't answer. I was already scrambling, yanking at the door handle again and again, desperate, and then, click, the locks popped. He unlocked them. Maybe he thought it was easier to let me out than to deal with the scene. Maybe he'd gotten what he wanted already. Maybe the point wasn't to take me somewhere. Maybe the point was to see what I'd do. I flung the door open and stumbled out onto the sidewalk. My legs felt wrong, like they belonged to someone else. I backed away from the car, holding my phone up like a weapon. The driver didn't chase me. He didn't get out. He just looked at me through the open window, expression unreadable in the streetlight, and said almost gently, "Next time, check the plate." Then he drove away. I stood there shaking in a quiet neighborhood, trying to understand what had just happened. The air smelled like wet grass. A porch light clicked on somewhere, and then off again. My app pinged. My real driver was still waiting at the pickup point. The app asked if I wanted to cancel. I couldn't stop laughing just a little, like my body didn't know what else to do. I called my friend with shaking hands. She came and got me. The next day I reported it to the rideshare company. They asked for details. They sent generic emails. They said they took safety seriously. The police officer I spoke to asked, "Did anything happen?" I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Did he touch you? Did he threaten you? Did he take anything?" I realized then how hard it is to explain the kind of fear that lives in almost. Almost happened. Almost there. Almost safe. I told him he didn't have to. He knew my name. That was true. When I got in the car, he'd said my name the way drivers do, like it was normal. I couldn't stop thinking about that, how he'd gotten it, how easily he'd gotten it. After that, every time I got into a car, I checked everything twice. I stared at the driver's face. I watched the road like a hawk. I held my phone in my hand the whole time. People told me I was being paranoid. But sometimes paranoia is just experience you haven't put in the past yet. A month later, I was scrolling through a local community group online, the kind where people post about lost cats and suspicious vans. Someone had posted, "Has anyone else had a fake rideshare pick them up? Same car, same plate somehow." Dozens of comments replied, "Me too, me too, me too." One comment said, "They're using stolen plates. They know the pickup points. They watch outside bars." Another said, "My driver told me to relax, said I was safe." When I read that, I felt the same cold nausea I'd felt in that car. Because it meant it wasn't one man with a weird impulse. It was a method, and methods don't need rage. They don't need drama. They only need you to assume the system is protecting you. My next story is the one I almost never tell, because it makes me sound unreliable, and I hate that feeling. I hate giving anyone a reason to doubt me. But the truth is, unreliability is sometimes the only clue you get. It happened after a minor medical procedure. Nothing serious, outpatient, a few hours at a clinic, a little anesthesia, and then home with instructions to rest. I was groggy, but coherent. I remember the nurse telling me not to drive. I remember signing something with a pen that felt too heavy. My friend picked me up and took me to my apartment. She sat with me for an hour, made sure I could drink water without spilling it, then left once I seemed stable. I thanked her. I promised I'd text if I needed anything. I fell asleep on my couch. When I woke up, it was dark outside. My mouth tasted like cotton. My body felt thick and slow, and my front door was unlocked. I know how that sounds. Maybe you forgot, but I'm careful about locks in a way that's almost compulsive. I lock the door, then I check it. Then I check it again with my hand on the handle. It's not a charming quirk. It's a need. I sat up, heart thudding, and stared at the door. I could see the deadbolt knob turned to the unlocked position. I got up slowly. My legs felt unsteady. I walked to the door and locked it, then pressed my forehead against the wood. Maybe my friend had left it unlocked when she left. Maybe she thought it was fine. Maybe she'd been distracted. I texted her, "Did you lock the door when you left?" She replied, "Of course, I always do at your place. Why?" I stared at the message. My fingers went numb. I walked through my apartment. Everything looked the same. But then I noticed my purse wasn't where I'd left it. I'd dropped it on the kitchen chair when I came in. Now it was on the floor by the couch, like it had slid off. I picked it up and opened it. My wallet was inside, my keys, everything. But my debit card had been moved. I keep my cards in a certain order: debit, then credit, then ID. Now my ID was in front, like someone had flipped through them and put them back wrong. A small thing, a nothing thing, except it meant hands had been in my purse. I sat back down, dizzy, and tried to think clearly, but the anesthesia haze made my thoughts feel like they were moving through water. I checked my phone. No missed calls, no notifications. I checked my calendar. No appointments. Then I saw it. A photo in my camera roll that I didn't remember taking. It was taken in my apartment. The angle was low from somewhere near my kitchen doorway, pointed toward the couch. And on the couch, in the dim light from my window, was me, asleep. My stomach turned so hard I almost gagged. I scrolled. There were more, 5 photos, taken over the course of about 20 minutes, according to the timestamps, each one slightly closer, each one more centered on my face. my hands, my body curled on the couch. The last photo was the closest, close enough to see the texture of my skin, the slackness of my mouth, close enough to be intimate. I sat there shaking, trying to force my memory to produce something, anything, between falling asleep and waking up. Nothing. No footsteps, no voice, no dream, just blankness. I called the clinic first, because my mind clung to the most logical connection, the anesthesia, the vulnerability, the fact that someone there knew I'd be out of it. The receptionist said politely, "Are you sure you didn't take those photos yourself?" I said, "No." She said, "Sometimes people do unusual things after sedation. It can affect short-term memory." Her tone suggested that the explanation was tidy and medical, and that I should be relieved. But the photos weren't shaky. They weren't accidental. They were framed, and the angle changed in a way that suggested a person moving deliberately, not a sedated patient, fumbling with a phone. I asked if anyone had access to my records. She said, "Only authorized staff." I asked who. She said, "I can't tell you that." I hung up and called the police. I tried to say it clearly. I tried to keep emotion out of it so I wouldn't sound hysterical. I think someone entered my apartment while I was sedated and took photos of me sleeping. The officer asked, "Was anything stolen?" I said, "I don't know." He asked, "Are you sure you didn't take the photos yourself?" I closed my eyes. "No." He sighed like I'd asked him to solve a riddle. "Do you have any sign of forced entry?" My door was unlocked. "Do you have a camera?" "No." "Then it's hard to prove." Hard to prove. I stared at my phone, at the photos that proved something had happened, and realized how easily proof becomes meaningless when it doesn't fit a category the system recognizes. I called my friend back. She came over immediately. When she saw the photos, she went pale in a way that made me feel less alone. We checked my locks. No damage. We checked the windows. Locked. Then she said quietly, "What if they came in when I was here?" I looked at her. She swallowed. What if someone followed us in, like when we unlocked the door? I imagined it. The hallway outside my apartment. Someone waiting near the stairs, listening, slipping in behind us while we were distracted, while I was groggy, and she was focused on getting me inside. Someone sitting silently in my apartment while we talked. The idea made my skin crawl. We searched everywhere, under the bed, behind the shower curtain, inside the closet, like we were acting out a fear we didn't want to admit was possible. We found nothing. But that night, my friend insisted on staying over. She slept in my bed with a baseball bat beside her, and I slept on the couch because I couldn't make myself go into the bedroom after seeing those photos of me on the couch. Around 4 a.m., I woke up and saw my phone screen glowing faintly. It was face down on the coffee table. I hadn't touched it. The screen was on, like it had just been used. I held my breath and picked it up. The camera app was open, not recording, not taking photos, just open, ready. I woke my friend up. We sat in silence, the bat between us, and listened to the apartment's normal noises. Pipes, distant traffic, the refrigerator cycling, nothing else. In the morning, my friend said, "Change your number." I did. I changed my locks. I bought a camera. I took my phone to a technician and asked if it had been accessed remotely. He shrugged. Could be. Could be not. Phones are complicated. Complicated. I wanted something simpler, something I could point to and name, but there wasn't. Weeks later, I got an email from the clinic reminding me to fill out a satisfaction survey. At the bottom, beneath the normal text, there was a line that didn't belong. "We hope you rested well after your visit." It could have been generic. It could have been nothing. But when I read it, my stomach turned the same way it had when I saw my door unlocked, because it felt like someone smiling at a secret. I never went back to that clinic. I never told them why. I knew what would happen. They'd deny it, or they'd medicalize it, or they'd turn it into a misunderstanding, and then I'd be the unreliable one again. So I did what a lot of people do when they can't get an answer. I built my life around avoiding the question. My last story is quieter than the others, and that's why it sticks with me the most. Because there's no single moment you can point to and say, "That was it." It happened gradually, like a room slowly losing oxygen. I'd moved again. New place, new routine. I started jogging in the early evenings, just before sunset, because I liked the way the day felt softer then. I ran the same route through a small park, past a pond with ducks that always looked mildly annoyed. There was a bench on the far side of the pond where an older man sat sometimes. He wasn't creepy. He didn't stare. He just sat there with a paperback, turning pages slowly, like he had nowhere else to be. For weeks he was just part of the scenery. Then one evening as I ran past, he looked up and nodded at me. I nodded back. The next time, he smiled. "Evening," he said. "Evening," I replied, breathless, and kept running. It was normal. It was neighborly. A few days later I was stretching by the path when he approached, still holding his book, and said, "You're improving. Your pace is steadier." I laughed politely. "Am I?" He nodded like he was pleased. "You used to slow down near the pond." My polite smile froze. It was such a small detail, something anyone might notice. But it made me aware of the fact that he'd been watching me long enough to compare versions of me. I shrugged, trying to make it casual. "Yeah, I guess." He smiled. "Good discipline." He walked away and sat back down, opened his book, and became scenery again. I told myself not to overthink it, but then I started noticing other things. Once I stopped to tie my shoe, and when I looked up, he was looking at me. Not staring, just looking, like he was checking something off a list. Another time I changed my route slightly, cutting across a different path to avoid a muddy patch. The next day, he was sitting on a different bench, one that had a view of my new path. I told myself he just liked variety. But a week later, I was walking to the grocery store in the middle of the day, different clothes, hair up, no running, and I saw him in the produce aisle. He was holding an apple, examining it like he had all the time in the world. When he noticed me, he smiled. "You're not running today," he said. My skin prickled. "No," I said. "Just errands." He nodded, as if that fit into his understanding of me. Rest days are important. I didn't know how to respond to that, because it implied a familiarity I hadn't agreed to. I mumbled something and pushed my cart away, heart thumping, trying to convince myself it was coincidence. The park was near my neighborhood. The grocery store was near my neighborhood. People overlap, but then he started appearing in places that didn't feel like natural overlap. At the coffee shop where I worked sometimes. He sat at a corner table with his paperback. At the library. At the bus stop near my apartment. Always calm, always polite, never invasive enough to justify a scene. That's how he did it, by staying just within the bounds of normal. One night I came home and found a small envelope tucked under my doormat. No stamp, no return address. Inside was a single page torn from a notebook. The handwriting was neat, patient, familiar in a way that made my stomach tighten. It said, "You run like you're trying to get away from something." I stood in the hallway outside my apartment, holding the note, and felt the old, heavy disbelief return. The quiet fear, the sense of being mapped. I went inside, locked the door, and checked the peephole. Nothing. The next day, I didn't go jogging. I stayed inside. I worked. I tried to make my life smaller again. In the evening, there was a knock at my door. I froze. I didn't move. I didn't speak. The knock came again, gentle. Then I heard his voice through the door, calm and friendly like we were neighbors. "You didn't go to the park today." I backed away from the door like it was hot. He continued, still soft. "I just wanted to make sure you're okay." I didn't answer. There was a pause. I imagined him standing in the hallway, head tilted slightly, listening for my breathing. Then he said, "You're inside. I can hear it." A small laugh, like he was teasing. I pressed my hand over my mouth to keep from making any sound. He sighed. "You don't have to be like that. I'm not here to hurt you." Silence. Then quietly, "I'm here because you looked like you needed someone to keep track." Keep track. The same phrase. My stomach turned. I felt the room tilt slightly, not from dizziness, but from the way patterns can suddenly line up and make the world feel too sharp. I stayed silent. After a long moment, he said, almost sadly, "You're going to make this harder than it needs to be." Then his footsteps retreated, slow and unhurried, like he knew I wasn't going anywhere. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on my couch in the dark, listening for any sound in the hallway. Every time a neighbor's door opened, I flinched. In the morning, I checked my doormat. Another envelope. Inside, "I can wait." I moved again. I didn't tell anyone why. I told myself it was for a job opportunity, for a change of scenery, for my mental health. All of those were true, in a way. But the real reason was simpler. I couldn't stand the feeling of being observed so gently, because gentle observation can become a cage without anyone ever raising their voice. Now, when I'm lying in bed at night, I sometimes think about how each of these things had the same shape, even though they happened in different places with different people. A note, a comment, a small proof that someone knows you better than they should. And the hardest part is that none of it requires a monster. None of it requires shadows in the corner or footsteps running up the stairs. It only requires someone patient, someone who understands that the quietest way to frighten a person is to make them question their own memory, their own routines, their own sense of being alone. So if you're listening to this while you're drifting off, if you're tucked into your blankets, phone dimmed, breathing slow, I want you to keep one small thought with you. Not like a warning, not like a threat, just a soft, uncomfortable possibility. Most of us don't notice when we start changing our lives to accommodate something we can't name. We just call it caution. We call it maturity. We call it being careful.